This episode brought to you by How to Write Manga, your complete guide to the secrets of Japanese comic book storytelling. Available wherever fine ebooks are sold.
The world has gone insane. Cosplayers rule the conventions. Gamers dominate the tabletop and the internet. Sci-fi subjugates the movies, and fantasy rules the bookstore with an iron fist. Only one group can bring order to this unruly mob. A team of uber geeks, masters of the nerdly arts, trained for decades in the hobby shops and basements of the nation. Mobilized by the secret masters, they are the Department of Nerdly Affairs.
Hello, operatives, and welcome to the Department of Nerdly Affairs. I'm your host, Rob Patterson, here with my co-host, Don Chisholm.
And I'll form the head!
Yes, you will, Don. Yes, you will. Because tonight we're going to be talking about mecha anime. Those destroyers of property and defenders of freedom. Something that both Don and I grew up on. So, let's start by first defining what is a mecha anime, Don, just in case we have a few listeners who actually aren't that familiar with them.
Okay, this is where it gets tricky. We kind of dabbled in this, if anybody remembers our 48-hour special about the history of the Japanese comic book industry.
I fell asleep.
Yeah, we all remember. And then we all drew faces on you when you were asleep. Anyway.
That was you!
Oh, no, I shouldn't have said it. No, it was Jack. Anyway.
There's our obligatory Jack reference for the episode. Hi, Jack.
Okay. So anyway, if you remember that, we talked about how the animation industry comes more out of the comic book industry than it did here. Mm-hmm. That there was a lot of cross-pollination, a lot of guys who worked in comics ended up getting to animation and sort of bouncing back and forth. From that end, you probably remember, if you want to start talking about mecha shows, mecha is just the Japanese word for mechanical. Mm-hmm. And it refers to any kind of gadget. So, like Knight Rider would be a mecha show technically. Yep. Iron Man is technically a mecha show.
Yep. The Japanese love to shorten everything down into two-syllable terms. That's a Japanese thing. So, for example, a personal computer is a pasocon, which is technically 3 syllables, I guess, but close enough. Continue.
Okay, and it's true. Nowadays, when you hear mecha, we tend to think of robot or powered armor. So there's no point reinventing the transforming wheel. So that's kind of what we're getting at here with mecha. We're going to be talking mostly about the robot stuff, specifically the giant robot stuff.
And specifically the piloted giant robot stuff.
Yeah, because that's something we never really did here in North America.
Did we have non-piloted giant robot stuff here in North America?
Yeah, we did, and they did in Japan. If you remember, we talked about Tetsuwan Atom, which was Astro Boy.
Right.
That comes out in 1954. And it wins. The comic is crazy popular. Years later, they do the show. The show is crazy popular. That sort of starts the mecha ball rolling pertaining to robots. But Astro's a robot. He's like a little kid-sized robot. He's sentient. He's self-motivating. That leads a few years later. We mentioned Tetsujin 28 Go, which is 56. And
actually, Tetsujin 28, if I remember right, the Go was actually the sequel series.
Well, no, Go it's the symbol for number. It's just it's Iron Man number 28 if you want to.
Oh, okay. They read that as Go? I didn't remember that. Okay, never mind.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's one of the running gags because that shows up in different shows later on. If you're wondering why something's called Go, it's usually they're doing that pun on the American Go as in, let's get the hell out of here, and Go as in number.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I've seen the Chinese character that goes along with it, and that's read as How, not Go. Okay. And so that's what confused me. It's like, oh, okay. So now I understand why. I never got that before. Thanks, Don.
Okay.
You're so educational. Yeah, there we go.
Oh, now we can get our government grant because we had an educational part.
Woohoo!
So, anyway, Tetsujin 28 Go is different because it's a giant robot. He's actually about, it fluctuates, but somewhere between 5 and 10 stories high, depending on who's drawing it and where the camera angle's at.
Yeah.
And he's remote controlled.
Mm-hmm.
It's this big box thing that you use, and you operate the robot.
Yep.
Those kind of stories took off. They were really popular for a long time. We kind of dabbled with that sort of thing here.
Oh?
Where we would have, if you had a robot character, and this is where we never got too into the mechanical stuff. We did more what we consider a superhero.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because a lot of our like action stuff, when you get to, say, the golden age of comics and that, it comes out of the old Men of Mystery, the old pulp hero kind of idea.
Right.
And one of the running themes that you get out of that is the technology is usually in the hands of the villain.
Mm.
That if there's a robot, it's a bad guy robot.
Right.
Robots for us were always the Astro Boy self-motivating type.
Mm-hmm.
Although there were Golden Age characters. There's one in particular, I can't remember the name of it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that it comes up, where this guy builds a robot and they solve crime. It's an old Golden Age comic. Usually solve crime by way of finding the criminal and squishing him to death.
That's Golden Age, yeah.
Solves the hell out of that crime. The robot is self-aware-ish, and he gets inside of it.
Oh, okay.
So in a way, it's almost powered armor, except if I remember correctly, I don't think he's operating it. I think he's more saying, all right, like, robot, go smash that guy, but he's in it. And
this is an American comic.
Yeah, this is like a Golden Age one. I can't remember the name of it. It had a really... I'll have to look it up. We'll have to put it in the show notes.
Okay, we'll find it.
And that was as close as we got. If you remember, when you get to the Silver Age, we had like Iron Man.
Mm-hmm.
And Iron Man is transistor powered, because that was the nanobots were in the 90s to computer chips in the 80s. 60s and 70s, transistors did everything.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting to note the earliest Iron Man was a big, bulky-looking thing. But they changed that in a hurry to make him more human scale, more human-looking. Yeah, so what ends up happening with us is because we kind of... for our comic industry, they kind of borrowed from the Men of Mystery. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I think we're so grounded in superheroes. Whereas in Japan, they had Astro Boy. The technology became the thing. Robots just blew everybody's mind, and they started going that way.
Right.
You get to Tetsujin 28, you get the big, bulky, industrial robot, I guess you'd say.
Mm-hmm.
That they're not cute. It's definitely a machine.
Right.
And then the first mech that we would think of as a mech was 1972, and that was, as we mentioned in the comic one, was Mazinger Z from Go Nagai.
Right. Which is the result of Go Nagai being stuck in traffic one day.
Yeah.
And he fantasized about his car being able to turn into a robot so he could step on all the other cars and just knock them out of the way and smash his way to work. And he thought, hey, that would make a great comic.
Mm-hmm.
We're not lying. That really is exactly how Go Nagai tells the story. In Japanese, of course.
Yeah,
and that's so. There's the very first Japanese giant robot story right there.
Yep.
Robot. I should actually make a note. Sorry, giant robot hero story. If I remember right, even the original Astro Boy does actually have a few characters like piloting powered armor or robots or something like that in it. I have vague recollections of that.
The original?
Yeah.
No, I don't think they.
What's that? The sequel that does? Because there's episodes of the one. I know there's episodes of the one that the remake. Because that's what I saw, of course, when I was young. They used to show it in the 80s, and they showed the remake one. And there's an episode in there I specifically remember of people piloting powered armor.
Yeah, there is. The 80s one is a little different from the original.
Oh, okay.
Because the 80s one is kind of it's the Osamu Tezuka universe.
Right.
That you meet characters from his other comics in the 80s one.
Okay.
In the original comics, the original story, I can't think of any, like the robots are all autonomous.
Okay, so there's none that where a person like pilots them or anything like that, or there's nothing like that.
No, not that I recall. All the ones I can think of, they're self-aware.
Right.
Ish. Because there's some like your primitive construction robots, but there's still, you would give it vocal commands and it would respond. Which is kind of understandable, because that was a theme of the comic. The comic in a lot of ways is about racism.
Right, yeah.
And it was this idea that self-aware robots were relatively new, and a lot of people weren't comfortable with the idea.
That
But
makes sense.
Yeah, as I recall, Mazinger Z officially is the first giant robot you get in and drive.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Because we never, for some reason, the giant robot you drive never, it didn't take off here until years later. Because we had...
but that... Okay, I can do you one better. So... Go Nagai came up with Mazinger Z in 1972, okay? Yeah. Technically, the Americans, Don, were hot on his heels, okay? Because there was actually a comic that came out in 73, the year after Mazinger debuted, but probably wasn't influenced by Mazinger at all, called It, the Living Colossus.
Oh, yeah, okay.
By Tony Isabella, and who was the one who drew it? Dick Ayers, okay? And that's a story about a guy who can basically project his consciousness into it's presented as a statue, but really it's got like robot bits inside, because the aliens like kind of turned the statue into a war machine. And so it was originally from a old Jack Kirby Monsters on the Loose type comic, from Tales of Suspense, sorry. And then Tony Isabella decided to revive it in 1973 with there's this wheelchair-bound character who gains the ability to project his consciousness into this thing in a series of circumstances that come, and he uses it to fight monsters.
Okay.
So you could almost, I'm going to make the argument here that that's technically a giant robot story, a piloted giant robot story, but I know I'm stretching it a little bit here, but it's basically the same idea.
Yeah, it kind of is. And that's because we did, we had, I guess you'd say the Tetsujin style giant robots here too.
We did.
Yeah, and probably in no small part by the fact that the Tetsujin cartoon was translated as Gigantor and shown here.
Yes, yeah, I know. People saw it in the 60s. Gigantor, bigger than big, stronger than strong. Yep, Gigantor. That would be it.
Yes, it would.
We're not that old. I've actually seen clips on YouTube.
But that we and again, we kind of dabbled in that, because I'm thinking when I was a kid, I used to like Frankenstein Jr.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Frankenstein Jr.
He had the giant robot. But again, it was that idea. His robot was self-aware, and he commanded it. He didn't get inside the thing and drive it.
Right.
And I seem to recall a couple other ones
but they were all, again, big robot buddy, basically. I mean, if you want to do that, you could almost even include the robot from Lost in Space. I mean, he's not a giant robot or anything like that, but he's still, the big robot buddy who can kick butt when the time comes for it, or the plot calls for it.
Yeah, there was even when they did the Tom Swift Jr. stories in the 50s, there's one where he builds a giant robot, and it's basically Tetsujin.
Right. Yeah, I could see that. Anyway, I apologize, though. The Living Colossus does come about a year after Mazinger Z. And Mazinger Z should not be underestimated. He literally is the father of all Japanese giant robots.
Yeah.
At least the piloted ones, again. Gigantor would technically be the grandfather, but I would argue, Gigantor is the grandfather. Mazinger Z is their father, I guess. Although great-grandfather... never mind. Anyway, okay. All right, so Mazinger Z is really important. And what are the defining characteristics of Mazinger Z that made it so special, Don?
Okay, now this is where we're going to get into an important distinction that's going to come up and is going to be argued by people until we're all like long past dead. And it's the difference between what in Japan is called the Super Robot Show and the Real Robot Show.
You're wrong.
Okay.
Sorry, I just had to get that out of the way. I mean, so I couldn't hold back. I apologize. Okay, fine. Finish your definitions.
Okay. Well, because I was going to say that Mazinger's the first drivable robot, and just like everything else that takes off, it gets copied to death to the point that people forget that there may have originally been a reason for the trope.
Mm-hmm.
And Mazinger is the prototype for what later becomes known as the Super Robot Show.
Right. Partly because he's basically a giant robot superhero.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they're called that, is because, and super robots literally are robot superheroes. I mean, they for the most part, not all of them, but I would argue the majority of them usually fight monsters in one form or another, or monstrous beings, usually invaders from some other planet or wherever that want to take over the world. Almost always take over the world. And they're usually one of a kind super beings that are almost indestructible and have special powers and basically kind of look like giant stovepipe robot wrestlers.
That's a good way of putting it. Because if you look at them, when you mentioned the wrestler thing, one of the standards of the design is the body will be a cube or a cylinder, but there'll be a pinched in portion for the waist, and it usually does look like a pro wrestling championship belt.
Yep. Yeah, almost always. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. Yeah, they're all basically wearing like wrestling belts.
Yep. And you hit upon the key point that makes it super, and it ties in with something we've mentioned about superheroes here and superhero technology. The giant robot in a super robot show is always a unique, super awesome, ultra-powered artifact of some kind. It's a one-of-a-kind creation, usually of the guy who pilots it, his uncle or his father who dies in the first episode. Yep. Or later on, it's a relic that they've recovered from somewhere that has weird powers of the ancient Lemurian kingdom, and it does things that are way beyond technology. That's a key point. It also ties into, like I said, one of the tropes that I remember seeing all through the 80s where people would bitch and moan that, a giant robot would be useless in combat because it's a big target. It is, but the trope for Mazinger, the original, was that they had a secret Japanium alloy that it was made out of that rendered it basically invulnerable to conventional weapons.
Go Japanium.
Yeah, and that's a staple, and that was why, tanks are useless, planes are useless, because they draw also from, if you go back earlier, the Daikaiju shows, that the idea Godzilla comes out, and Godzilla was a force of nature, a force of destruction. When the giant robot stuff comes out, even back to the Tetsujin days, they kind of usurp a lot of that imagery.
Well, actually, let's go back a tiny step, though. Tetsujin and also Ultraman. Remember, Ultraman premieres about almost 10 years before Mazinger does.
Yeah.
And there have been a number of Ultra series, even Ultra 7, Ultraman Returns. We'd have to go back to our Ultraman episode to talk about which ones. But the key point is this, is that there'd already been a bunch of live action stuff in this vein, of a giant superhero guy or whatever is fighting monsters. Heck, actually, even Ultra 7 has a giant robot companion. One of his capsule monsters, if I remember right, is a giant robot.
King Joe.
Yeah, there we go. And so we already have had giant robots fighting monsters. It's just that or robot-like characters. Ultraman is kind of robot-ish even, and some of his clones are absolutely robot-ish. Even by the time Mazinger comes out. So he's already building on stuff that already exists. He's already, he's not coming up with this from whole cloth. He's riffing on what he's already been watching on TV.
Yeah. And it's, as that kind of takes off and builds, it sort of feeds on itself.
Yep.
I'm wondering, because that's another one of them things that it never... and I'm betting it's because of the expense. We dabbled with giant monsters back in the 50s, but by the time you get to the 60s, we didn't make very many giant monster movies. And I'm wondering if it's just the cost that...
It's the cost.
Yeah, because we got all the B movies of the late 50s going into the 60s, and they were all El Cheapo productions.
Well, yeah, Corman wasn't exactly known for spending a lot of money on those movies and his counterparts at that time. And so the idea of spending all that money to build a city or something like that, like a model city to be trashed, no, that's way too expensive.
Yeah.
I don't think there were any actually. And then the Japanese were doing it and they were doing such a great job. It was just cheaper to buy their stuff and just dub it and put it out than it was to actually make our own.
Yeah, plus you had Tsuburaya Productions, which was a studio designed to do suitmation, giant monster movies.
Well, science fiction stuff in general.
Yeah.
For example, they did try some stuff. There's a movie called The Green Slime, which is Tsuburaya, and I believe it's American production. Yeah. And that's why it's mostly an American cast, and they all speak English, but all the special effects, which are pretty good actually for their time, are Tsuburaya production work.
Yeah.
But I don't think it did very well. And I think that was part of the problem. They did try to kind of work with Tsuburaya as the effects house, but it didn't quite seem to work, most of them. So I just think they just gave up.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I say, when we did our giant monster stuff, most of it tended to be stop action.
Yes, yeah, there's that too. Because damn you, Harryhausen.
Yeah, but that's that again, like you were saying, that's
No, I have to say I'm kidding, because he is a god among effects artists, so I don't want to disgrace. I really am kidding to Harry, wherever you are out there. Mm-hmm. I apologize, man. I really do.
All right, we were finally going to get some hate mail.
No, sorry, man. I can't hate Harryhausen. He was too awesome. Yes, yeah, it was mostly live action. Now, actually, going back to Mazinger, though, one of the things I find fascinating, though, is, and this may be because he was working with ideas that already existed, he was just combining them in an interesting way, is how much of Mazinger was actually thought through. That's something that has always amazed me, actually. Like, for example, everyone says, and this is a line for anyone, especially of our generation, who saw these giant robot cartoons, who saw, why don't they send all the giant monsters at the same time? They just kick his ass. So why don't they send all the giant monsters at the same time, Don?
Well, that was it's implied in the old, the Mazinger show that I'm thinking of a line from a video that I'll point out, that the bad guy, Dr. Hell, and it's not Mr. Hell, he didn't get that degree for nothing, which was the line I was thinking from the video.
Right.
That he had recovered the giant robot monsters. It was like an ancient civilization. And they kind of elaborated that he either can only control them one or two at a time, or a lot of them aren't active, because there's this couple scenes in the early episodes where you sort of see them in this chamber. And they're not active. And this is one of the reasons why he needs all his dipshit lieutenants and that, because it's kind of implied that somebody has to sort of control the monster.
Right. Yeah, someone's got to keep it under control. So we can only send out so many at the same time, which I always thought was great, because that's something that almost every other show after this never followed at all.
Yeah.
So the complaint does apply to almost everything, but not quite Mazinger.
Yeah, and he does, in a couple episodes, as I recall, he does send out more than one. He'll send 2 or 3.
Right. He's sending out what he's got, but he's sending out as many as he can manage at a time.
Yeah. And that ties in too with, we were saying, if you remember, the Ultraman TV shows, the plot would only have one monster at a time, partly because of the expense and partly because each monster was a separate event.
Right.
In a lot, especially, say, Ultraman. It wasn't the idea of, there's an evil guy who just keeps sending hordes of monsters, kind of becomes ingrained later.
Right.
But the original ones, the monsters were, sometimes it'd be an alien that showed up, or they'd dig something up, or some other weird, a kid's drawing would come to life or whatever. And each was a singular event, and the giant robot cartoons kind of borrowed from that.
Right.
Again, I think, like you were saying, that imagery was already out there, so to do something different might have been too drastic. It wouldn't have taken off, because, again, we said before... What?
Keep in mind, I just want to bring this up, 72, the year Mazinger came out, was also the year Gatchaman premiered.
Yeah.
And Gatchaman, I would argue, is also a mecha show. The only thing it's lacking is the mecha.
Well, it depends. The bad guys certainly have them.
Oh, no, that's what I mean. The bad guys all have evil giant bug monsters. They all have mecha. It's just the heroes don't have a mecha. They have a ship, but they don't have they don't have a robot. That's what I mean by mecha in this case. But in all every other sense, Gatchaman is a mecha series.
Yeah.
It just happens to not have a giant robot.
Yeah, because that kind of borrows again from the Tetsujin idea. That the bad guys were building they're as I recall, they're trying to copy Tetsujin.
Well, but weren't the bad guy mecha in Gatchaman, aren't they piloted?
Yeah, they're piloted, but they're more like battleships
that look like giant monsters.
Yeah, because it's not there's a guy driving it. There's like 50 guys in the command center and like an army of dudes, and they're more like it's a similar idea, but the execution's a little different.
Okay.
It wasn't a personal vehicle that you drove. It was like a mobile battle station.
Right. So again, going back to what we've kind of before our audience gets too tired of hearing about Mazinger, or almost hearing about Mazinger and then going off on different tangents. The point to this is, again, that Mazinger didn't come out of thin air. Yeah. Mazinger itself is the product of multiple things that were going on at that time and that came before it. Yeah. It's kind of a singularity point where everything came together, but it didn't come out of thin air. And yeah, there was another show on the air and maybe other ones besides Gatchaman that actually were also doing that kind of thing. So he was kind of going with the flow of the times.
Yeah, it's like we said before, if you do something totally new, nobody will get it, but you can add one twist and get away with it. And that was kind of that idea of you get in it, you drive it like a vehicle. And then everybody, that just took off, and that was because who wouldn't want to stomp on their city in a giant robot?
I think we all agreed on.
Yep. And it sets up, like I said, Mazinger becomes the formula for the Super Robot show.
Which, as we've discussed, is every episode, the bad guys send out a evil robot to do evil stuff, or they have an evil plan, and our heroes find out about it. Two robots fight, or robot and a monster fight, as the case may be. The good guy wins, and peace is restored. And that's basically it. And pretty much every Super Robot show ever is that, or a variant thereof.
Well, you're forgetting another important part of the Super Robot genre, though.
Oh, what one?
That the theme song basically always translates to, he's awesome, and a list of his powers.
Yes, that's true. Yep, there's we shouldn't forget that the fact that the robot pilot is a hot-headed idiot.
Yeah, usually.
I mean, there are very few giant robot pilots that are hot-headed, that are not hot-headed idiots, especially super robot pilots. Again, that's because it's better for comedy and they get themselves into trouble more easily that way. And they make lots of mistakes.
There's that, and again, because everybody borrows the formula so clearly, they always have to have a chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, that's true.
They either got something to prove to their dad who didn't love them, or they're trying to get revenge for their uncle being killed by the evil empire, or whatever. But yeah, they always have a chip on their shoulder.
Definitely. Okay, so let's move on then. Now that we've established what the formula is, what do you think the next significant giant robot show was?
Oh, after Mazinger?
Yes.
The next big one was probably Getta Robo.
And Getta Robo was big. Why?
Getta Robo is the first combining show. That the premise was before the evil aliens invade, the scientist guy built 3 space fighters that were meant for exploration.
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Yeah, but that's why they had all the rocket launchers. Could explore the hell out of the cosmos.
Oh, they're doing it American style.
Oh.
The galaxy needs some freedom, man.
But yeah, when the aliens attack, he rigs them up so that they combine together. And depending on which order you link them up, they turn into one of 3 different robots.
Right. A cool-looking one, an almost cool-looking one, and a derpy-looking one.
Yeah, derpy's probably the best way of putting it, because you're kind of starting to see the again, right from Mazinger. You've got the angry guy hero.
Mm-hmm.
You've got his angry female sidekick.
Yep.
You've got the comic relief tough fat guy.
Mm-hmm.
And usually a kid for whatever reason.
Right.
Yeah, because that's Getta Robo added 2 hotheads and a fat guy in their mix. You can guess who piloted the derpy robot.
It's not the hotheads.
No, it's not. And that was the one too. The first Getta Robo, the fat guy goes into combat, as I recall. He's wearing like a baseball bat catcher armor.
Mm-hmm.
He's got like the padded chest plate and the face mask for some reason.
Are you sure you're not confusing it with the second Getta Robo series?
It's tough because they're basically the same show.
They're basically the same show, but I think you're referring to the second one because the first one, they're I'm trying to remember what their names are, but okay, we've got heroic tough guy, we've got cool tough guy, and we've got the fat guy is a judo master.
Oh, okay.
So he wears like the judo outfit because that's his thing, right? His robot, the derpy one, has no legs. It just has like tracks or something. And so as an end result, he like does judo throws because he just has arms, so he just throws them around. Oh, it's not until we get to Getta Robo G in 1975 that I think that's the one that you're referring to, which has the where he's got the baseball catcher thing going on.
Yeah, okay, you're right. Because it's tough to tell because, again, they're both the same show.
Right. And this is kind of also the beginning of the team thing, where instead of just having one main dude, now we have like 3 main dudes who obviously do not get along with each other because drama.
But that was a Mazinger thing too, though, because if you remember in the original, when it gets rolling, the good guys have 3 giant robots.
They do, but it's a little different. Because I'd argue that these guys have to work together to defeat the bad guys. In the end, the 2, Aphrodite Ace and, or is it Venus Ace? Whichever.
No, Aphrodite Ace was and then Boss Robo was
then Boss Robo.
The derpy one.
The original derpy one. Aphrodite Ace, the female one, is there to basically try to fight the bad guy first and get her ass kicked so that Mazinger Z has to go out and save her each episode. Boss Robo is there to be comic relief.
Well, and he gets his ass kicked a lot too, so don't rule him out.
Also get rescued by Great Mazinger or Great Mazinger, take your pick. But the point is Getta Robo, all 3 of them are badasses. Mm-hmm. And it's more of an equal relationship, I'd argue. I mean, It's not there's that transition between the 2, but okay. But either way, it's the beginning of the whole team thing is happening here. Yeah. It's a variation.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can agree on that. So yes, definitely Getta Robo is an important one. That Getta Robo is one of those interesting ones that I've noticed Japanese fans adore. They always have, and they seemingly always will. But fans outside Japan couldn't give a crap about. For the most part, Getta Robo, I mean, some people are like, oh, that Getta Robo thing looks kind of cool. But that's about it. And of course, they're always referring to the cool-looking mode, not the other 2, which look really bad usually. Mm-hmm. Though there are some later versions that actually don't look that bad. But the point, again, being that Getta Robo is one of those things that it seems to be uniquely Japanese. Mm-hmm. And other people don't seem to quite get it as much. I'm not saying I do either. Actually, I've tried, but Getta Robo, I understand it, but I don't quite get the super appeal to it that seems to be there for Japanese people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's another one though. It's so popular because it's one of the first.
That's true.
And it's just kind of burned into everybody's consciousness.
Yep. I can see that. All right, so let's continue moving on then. See, in 75 then, and by the way, there are other robot series we're skipping just because they're just copies of Great Mazinger, basically.
Yeah, I think it doesn't hurt to say, when you talk about Japanese robot cartoons, there are so many of them, and I mean so many, oh my god, you're always discovering more, that a lot of them are kind of falling in the category of an also ran.
Yep. Well, to give an idea, in 1976, there were 7 giant robot cartoons produced alone. In 77, there were 6 of them produced. So the point is, they were just, once Mazinger was a mega hit, everyone wanted that piece of that, giant robot cash. And so they were pumping them out, partly, of course, inspired by toy companies, because toy sales were through the roof. And so the toy companies were like, make more. And okay. And so the studios had the money. Also, Japan was was basically flush with cash at this point as well. Mm-hmm. So, they were in their economic boom period. And so as an end result, the studios had money to work with. The people had money to buy toys. There was just money flowing, so they could afford to make lots of these shows.
Yeah, it kind of ties in. There's, 2 points. Number one, they made so many of them that they reached a critical mass and collapsed in on themselves.
Well, we'll get to that.
Well, no, I'm talking even now, which has resulted in this weird time-space singularity, so that you'll always find more Japanese giant robot cartoons because there's more of them popping up in the past.
Right.
Like they're literally multiplying, like quantum filaments in Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Ooh, geek reference.
that's kind of 2 jokes, but it certainly seems that way, because when you go looking, you're always finding another little company that did another one.
Yeah, that's true. And because everyone and their brother and sister and cousin and their cousin's dog did one, and there were also Chinese and Korean ones as well.
Yeah,
not many, but there are. Korean did. Oh, they did. Taekwon V, I believe it's called, which is their version of Mazinger. It's literally Mazinger with a slightly different color scheme. It's literally that. It's Taekwon V, and I think there's 1 or 2 other ones as well that the Koreans did. I think the Taiwanese might have done one as well. So because I know Mazinger was super popular in Taiwan. I just had to mention it to my wife, and she started singing the Chinese Mazinger theme song.
Wow.
And my wife wasn't born for a number of years. She was born a little in the mid-70s. So, but she still saw it when she was growing up, and she still remembers it because everyone loved it to pieces. Same with Gatchaman. They watched that too.
Yeah, it's kind of the way to think of it for anybody listening who's like over 35 or way over 35. When they did the 60s Batman TV show, that was so crazy popular that kind of led to a superhero boom in general. And then if you think to the 70s when Star Wars came out, and then everything was Star Wars.
Right.
That's kind of what happened when like Mazinger took off. And that's kind of what happened years earlier with like Tetsujin and Astro Boy.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's a good way to describe it. That's a very good way to describe it. Yeah. Again, it's this happens with everything. Something comes along and creates a new paradigm. In other words, a new way of making money, and everyone jumps on it. That's just the natural way of things, especially in a capitalist society. That's the way we roll. Yeah,
and then they become kind of like cultural way stations, and that's, again, we never had a Mazinger, and I think that's one of the reasons why we didn't really get into the giant mecha piloting robot thing until way later, because the big events that took off for us were different from the ones in Japan. And like I said, we had Batman and Star Wars.
Yeah, well, there were some other minor ones in between, but yes, I mean, and we did have the option, just to fast forward a little bit, the best of the 70s giant robot cartoons, almost the best, I should say, almost the best, basically did get bundled and shown in North America in, I believe, the either late 70s or early 80s. I think it was the early 80s under Force 5.
Yeah.
So they bundled them together, and they were shown in many places. Unfortunately, none that I could see, so I didn't get to grow up on them, but anyway. That's the sucky thing about living in southwestern Ontario. And not next to... You got them. I know you did. Yeah. Of course you did, because you lived next to Detroit.
We saw a lot of them in Spanish, but we saw them.
Okay, well, there's that. But we'll get to that in a bit. But anyway, so there were opportunities for them to take off here, but they never quite did.
Yeah.
Is what I would argue. With one exception that we'll get to a little later on. Okay. So we just go back to our little timeline here. The next big one I generally say, and is generally agreed to be Yusha Raideen in 75. Yeah. And Raideen has the distinction. Raideen has the distinction of being the first giant robot that transformed into a plane, basically. It transformed into this kind of giant space fighter jet thingy. And also, if I remember right, it was also one of the first of the almost more serious ones. It tried to do things a little differently than the others. If I remember right, Raideen was actually just a giant artifact that they found, and they said, okay, we can use this to battle those evil giant robots. And so they did.
Yeah, it was, if I remember, it was like these ancient alien guys came back and were going to kill off humanity and take the Earth back. And yeah, the Raideen was this ancient, like, mystical super robot that I forget how it worked. I've only seen a couple episodes of the original one. And I forget exactly how it worked. But yeah, the guy, he drove it, and it was... He kind of linked with it. It was, again, it was pretty close to the Living Colossus you mentioned earlier.
Right. Yeah.
At least in theory.
In theory, yeah. Well, but it wasn't his spirit that was running. He was actually in Raideen.
If I remember, though, he like beams inside of it.
Right. Well, that became a thing after a certain point.
Yeah, because you always had the big, long activating the robot scene, because that ate up about 45 seconds of animation every episode.
So that's why it was always super well animated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I view transformation sequences. They're really exciting sequences that are repeated again and again and again every episode. Yeah. And so, but that's like cheap time that you don't have to fill every episode.
Yeah, and remember, this was back in, like, we're still in the 70s. So what ended up was... you didn't have home video. So that scene didn't grate on your nerves because you weren't binge watching it and seeing it every 18 minutes. Yeah, like that's one of the reasons you could get off. Same thing with our cartoons. That's one of the reasons you get away with the stock animated scenes, because people were only watching this like once a week or so. Yeah,
exactly. And when you're only watching them once a week, yeah, you just don't notice that stuff, especially when you're a kid.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so there we go. So Yusha Raideen happened, and then the next big series I think that's probably worth mentioning is Goddam Gowapper V.
I thought you were going to say Tekkaman.
Oh, Tekkaman's just an Ultraman ripoff. It's an animated Ultraman ripoff, so who cares?
Well, there's one notable thing about Tekkaman.
Okay, fine. I'm... sorry, Tekkaman fans. I'm not a fan. Okay, go.
Yeah, Tekkaman is more... There's nominally... Pegasus is nominally a giant robot. But he's more like a spaceship that's kind of shaped like a robot.
Right.
Tekkaman is notable. We watched it here. There's an English dub that came out a long time ago. We're talking like early 80s, I think.
Well, that would be the original Tekkaman, not Blade then.
Yeah, this was the original. And the thing that it was notable for was the voice acting.
Right.
Because I think the guy who turned to Tekkaman, I think his name was Barry.
And okay.
Which he had because we used this shtick in a bunch of tabletop role-playing games we played. He talked monotone until he got to the point where he'd mention like a power and ability.
Right.
So you would get things like, he is trying to knock me off of his ship, but he cannot because I will use my magnet boots. And he did that all the time.
Okay.
And it was so messed up. And I believe the commander of the alien invaders was named Dink. So that really struck a chord with us as kids watching this show.
Commander Dink. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
And then, because he teams up with this alien guy who has like the biggest fro in cartoon history.
Tekkaman does?
Yeah, like Barry. And his name, I think his name was like Argo or Avro. We called him Afro because it sounded like his name, and it was huge and glorious. Right. And he had this weird like disco pose he'd strike to activate his alien powers. It was such a fucked up show.
I may have to actually go back and give Tekkaman a second look if I can find it.
I went looking and I can't find that translation that we watched like when we were kids.
I bet they didn't even put it out on home video. Actually, wait, no, I think they did because I vaguely remember seeing it. I remember seeing it in like the kids sections once upon a time in video stores. So I'm pretty sure it did get put out on videotape, but probably just super cheap.
Yeah, because that
is now lost.
That was a lot of these like old Super Robot shows, like the Force 5. They became filler in, like you said, the late 70s, early 80s. You'd see them on syndicated channels, usually like 4 or 5 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And then a lot of them were released on home video. Mm-hmm. Because people were buying VCRs. They needed something to make people buy VCRs. Just put these shows. They were cheap. There's kind of a caveat that we're approaching here in America. Mm-hmm. That sort of it's the first shot, I guess, at really popularizing this stuff here. Mm-hmm. And that was the Shogun Warriors.
Yes. That wouldn't happen until like 77, 78?
76 or 77.
Oh, 76, 77. Yeah, so there's the Shogun Warriors where they brought the toys over.
Yeah, and they brought them over with none of the Japanese story.
Yep.
And it was because most of them, they were the jumbo machiners, the big 2-foot high ones from Japan.
Yep.
Or the Chogokin, which were the metal ones.
Right.
That were usually around, say, 5 to 8 inches, or the little Star Wars sized ones.
Yep, I remember them.
And they brought the robots over. They didn't have any of the story. They still had all the original packaging. Because remember, Tim Eldred talked about when he was a kid, when we interviewed him, that he thought they had made up this weird magical kind of script to put on all of these like figures.
Right.
And it was Japanese because all the characters had that wrestling belt. Part of them would be a sticker that had their name on it. Yep. The thing that was interesting about that was the sort of story behind the toys was they were self-aware robots.
Right.
You see the commercials, the kids are like playing with them as if like Mazinger is a character. And then the coloring books, they're characters.
They were, except in the Marvel comic.
Yep. And then the Marvel comic made them vehicles like they were in Japan.
Right. Now, there's probably a reason for that, though, because I think we've mentioned on this show before, actually, during the 1970s, and I think prior to this, New York actually had a Japanese language cable access station.
Right.
And they were showing a lot of these cartoons back in the 70s. We mentioned that before because and we know that a lot of the Marvel artists of that time were watching these cartoons.
Yeah.
They may or may not have been subtitled, that part I'm not sure, but it doesn't matter. So the key point is, when they did the Shogun Warriors comic book, I have no doubts the people who were doing it probably actually had seen some actual Japanese cartoons, so they knew what they were supposed to be. Yeah. That was them actually trying to do a Japanese style story.
Yeah, and even the way the bad guys worked in the heroes, it was the Marvel Shogun Warriors was a super robot comic.
Yeah, it was. And that was, I believe, 1978 to 1979. 78, 79, I think. Let me double check that.
I think it went 80. The Shogun Warrior toys only lasted a couple years because the toys came out in 76, and then when you got to 78, 79, you had the kid who choked to death on the Battlestar Galactica missile.
Yep.
So toys that shoot were out, and the problem was that's what made the Shogun Warriors cool, was they had all these like shooting things.
Right.
The licensing was kind of expensive for sales, and they just kind of quietly stopped doing the Shogun Warriors.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately. And the answer to your question, the answer is 79 to 1980. February 79 to September 1980, 20 issues of the Shogun Warriors comic, which I have all of them. Okay? I managed to collect them from back bins years ago, just because they were awesome, sort of.
Yeah. Well, it was like I remember it fondly as a kid because, like I say, we were watching all of these different shows,
right,
in languages none of us understood, and it was actually, like I say, it was a good go. The Marvel one was a good go at doing a Japanese style robot show. A weird thing that I find interesting when you look at, say, the Shogun Warriors or the Micronauts were popular too, the toys. All of these were like Japanese science fiction-y things that were brought over that came here just before Star Wars, and then kind of rode the Star Wars sci-fi wave.
Yeah. But there's the problem, right? They were here just before Star Wars, so they couldn't. The Shogun Warriors, for example, were trying to run. They were called Shogun because Shogun, I believe, the miniseries, the based on the book by James Clavell, had come out, and that's why everyone was thinking about Japanese stuff and Shogun and all that at that time. So that's where that name comes from. And they were kind of trying to ride the Japanese culture wave just around the time of Star Wars, really, and it didn't quite work out for them at that point because there wasn't that. It didn't quite work, I should say. It just didn't quite mesh up.
Yeah, and sometimes it did and it didn't. Like the Micronauts did well, but it's interesting that Star Wars itself borrowed a lot from like Japanese stories and that.
Oh, Star Wars borrowed a ton from Japanese stuff. There's no question on that.
And like you said, the Shogun book and the miniseries, it's kind of interesting how that all kind of comes at the same time.
Yeah. Very true. Very true. Well, that was Japan's economic boom, right? Japan was rising in prominence in the global scene, and especially economics. And so as an end result, I mean, Americans were suddenly forced to be aware of Japan as a first world nation. And so suddenly everyone's like, oh, the future is Japanese. We'll be speaking Japanese one day. Little did they know, we'd all be speaking Russian instead. Joke's on you, comrade. All right, so yeah. So they did that. So the Shogun Warriors happened, and okay. So let's get back on track then. So the next major one is of course Goddam Gowapper V, and actually I only because it was by Tatsunoko. I just love saying that Goddam Gowapper V. No, folks, that's the actual name of the show from 1976. Goddam Gowapper V.
What was that name again?
Goddam Gowapper V. I mean, that is the most messed up giant robot name ever.
Have you seen the show?
No, I haven't actually.
It's another one that comes out of the weird cartoony comedic Silver Age slapstick school of robot design.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay.
If you ever see it, it's all these weird little chubby robots, and the designs are very busy.
Right. Yeah. Well, the show itself was totally, I'm told, uninspired, and it actually is unexceptional except for the name. Really, totally. It's just it has that name, so Goddam Gowapper V. I mean, you could do so much with that name. Oh my God, do a whole comedy routine on it. We should get Doke on. Sorry.
Because Doke would look at it and go, "Why are you making me watch this?"
just watch it, Doke. Anyway, all right. So, but actually, in 1976, when Goddam Gowapper V, sorry, I had to one more time, came out, another more important series actually came out, and that would be Combattler V by Toei. Why is Combattler V important, Don?
Oh, that's going with what you said before about how Getta Robo presented that idea of the team.
Mm-hmm.
Combattler V is the one that kind of solidifies that formula because there's 5 of them. There's like the hothead hero. There's the kid sidekick.
No, you're doing it wrong. There's the hot-headed hero.
Right.
There's the ace. There's the girl. There's the big fat guy, and there's the kid sidekick.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the formula.
And that's here when many people think of that formula, that Power Rangers-esque formula, that's it. Now, mind you, it comes from Gatchaman. I mean, let's be honest here. It's coming from Gatchaman, which was only 4 years before this, and was Super God massively popular. Sorry, Super God Phoenixly madly popular. Super God Phoenix madly popular. But the point is that Combattler 5 was the first giant robot show to do it. And in fact, it literally was. Even the first Sentai series to do it, which would be Battle Fever J, wouldn't actually pop up for a couple years. Yeah. In fact, there wouldn't be a Sentai robot for, I believe, another 2 years. before the first one, which would be Leopardon in the Supaidaman Japanese Spider-Man live-action series that they did. Was the very first Japanese, live-action giant robot thingy. And then the first one with a team would be Battle Fever J, which appears in, 1979. Yeah. So this really is the very first team show where we have 5 good-looking young heroes from all walks of life piloting a giant robot, as opposed to a giant bird plane thingy.
Yeah, there's one from the 60s that kind of hints at that, I guess. Mm-hmm. Oh, what the hell was it called? Was it Rainbow Soldier Robin?
It might be. I know of that one, but I don't know that much about it.
Yeah, it's this kid, and he's got these like buddy robots. That again, it's that they're almost that, but you don't have a team piloting the robots. It's the robots themselves,
right?
And each one has kind of different personality, and I think they're all like a different color. And I can't remember. I don't think they all join together though. I think they're just like a team, and they turn into like spaceships, and it's kind of an Ambassador Magma clone.
Yeah, Rainbow Sentai Robin or Rainbow Squad Robin or something like that it's called. Yeah, there's not a lot on it. I just did a quick search. Yeah. I'd probably have to go... let's just say I would have to go deep to actually find much more information about it. Anyway.
Yeah, and it kind of hints at that idea, but yeah, Combattler V is the first... That's the formula. That becomes the new formula.
And it is still the formula it's running today. That's the formula that Power Rangers runs off of.
Yep.
I mean, literally. So it's all Combattler V. It really is.
Yeah. V. Yeah, that sticks in your head forever.
Yeah, go listen to the theme song, folks. We'll listen to it in the show notes and then try to get it out. I've had the Mazinger Z theme song stuck in my head for 15 years. So ever since I first heard it, it's still in my head. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing it. But yeah, as Don said, they're all basically... Here's the robot's name repeated 50 times and a list of their powers. And some are, look how awesome they are, look how mighty they are, look how much ass they kick. That's pretty much every giant super robot theme of the 70s right there. And they're mostly sung by the same guy, too, whose name I can't remember.
Oh, yeah, that's true, isn't it?
They're almost all... There's a guy who became the super robot guy. And his name is... Oh, crap, can't remember.
Yeah, like I said, I forgot about that. Yeah, it was the same guy who did like all of these theme songs.
Yep. Oh, by the way, we should also note that Mazinger Z did actually get shown as Transor Z in '85 in the United States. It took them like 12 years, but they eventually got around to it.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it was one of those things that it got held up. The legal rights kind of got held up.
Okay.
It was supposed to be a little earlier, but
it was supposed to be part of the Force 5.
Yeah, but Gonagai had problems.
Mm-hmm.
If I remember correctly, one of the studios kind of wrote him out of his own show, one of the other companies he worked with.
Right.
And he kind of wanted to clamp down on the rights to his stuff.
Right.
And Mazinger being kind of an important show and one of his mega hits, he was really reluctant to license it out. And that was why it took so long before it got shown in America.
By the way, apparently it's out on DVD. Discotech Media acquired the American home rights to it. I'm looking at the entry now. The result was a release of all 92 episodes in 2 volumes. Mazinger Z TV series volume 1 and 2.
Yeah, well, a lot of these shows you can get they were released on disc in the last like 5 to 10 years. Like proper North American releases.
Yeah.
Discotech's done a ton of them.
I believe Discotech are they're doing the Lord's work. That's all I have to say. While I look up whoever sang the Mazinger Z theme song, who should we talk about next, Don?
We got well, there's one that I'm gonna mention because you emailed me your list.
Right. Yep.
Of Super Robot shows, and I can already find one that's not on this list.
Oh, what one?
Dinosaur War Eisenborg.
Okay. You do that.
Because it's another one. It's not exactly a well, they have sort of, it's not exactly a giant robot show.
Mm-hmm.
the two main characters link together to form this like giant cyber elf that they fight intelligent dinosaurs from the core of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
But it uses again a lot of the imagery. It borrows from the Super Robot and the Ultraman ripoff kind of shows. Because that was the one. There's an English movie, Attack of the Super Monsters.
Yeah, it's Super Monsters. Yes, Attack of the Super Monsters. Yeah, it's Eisenberg. Yeah.
Because what they did is they did the live action model work for the dinosaurs.
Mm-hmm.
And the Eisenberg is this big ship. It's like a land train kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then the character parts are all animated, and they sort of, through the magic of television editing, they seamlessly combine the two into one show.
He's being extremely sarcastic, folks.
If you've ever seen it, you understand. Yeah. Because it came out too when you had the super robots.
Mm-hmm.
You also started to see some vehicle shows in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Like they kind of run parallel. It's a different issue, but you get sign of that back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
Partly too because when you get to the Combatler V thing and what you get in the Sentai stuff, Combatler V is 5 vehicles.
Yes.
That link together. And that becomes a thing because you get this hybridization of the robot and the vehicles.
Yeah.
And that again, that forms like the next template and
Yep. By the way, the guy I was looking for is Ichiro Mizuki.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Ichiro Mizuki, he sang Mazinger Z, Babel II, Robot Detective, Kamen Rider, Great Mazinger, Kamen Rider Stronger, Tekkaman, Steel Jeeg, Akomizer 3, Combatler 5, Captain Harlock. He is literally known as the Anna King or the Emperor of Anime Songs in Japan.
Yep.
And he's active up until today. He started in 1968. He's still singing them. I believe, actually, one of the people you can hear, I think he's part of Jam Project, I believe. Yes. And so you can actually even hear him sing in the One Punch Man opening theme.
Wow.
He's one of the singers on that, I believe. And so, yeah, he's still around. He's basically, once you know his voice, you'll hear him everywhere. Because, yeah, he really is. Like, he's the Japanese opening theme guy, basically. He's the sound of Japanese giant robot cartoons.
Right.
And it's just astounding how much he did. But anyway, so, okay, before we bore our audience too much, let's get back a little bit back on track here. So, yes, Combatler V set so many standards, from vehicles to the 5 good-looking heroes from all walks of life, working together with a giant robot to defend the Earth from an evil empire. Yeah. It should also be noted that as these giant robot cartoons were going along, one interesting note is they tended to slowly become darker and darker.
Yeah,
I noticed that, where they were still doing the kids, a young teenage boy and his friends fighting with a giant robot, fighting monsters, but they were kept trying different things and trying different approaches. So, for example, in 1977, moving along, we get Dengard Ace, which is by Leiji Matsumoto, who, of course, is the creator of Space Cruiser Yamato. Dengard Ace is one of my personal favorites. I managed to see videotapes of it when I was a kid, and I've always been fond of it. Mostly, it's fascinating because if you ever see Dengard Ace, it's mostly almost a space opera adventure series that also happens to have a giant robot in it.
Yeah.
Like, the robot doesn't even appear in many episodes. I'm not kidding. Often it's just characters using space fighters and such. And yeah, now then the robot shows up when it's not damaged to hell and they're having to replace it in the back. Mm-hmm. The focus is the characters, not the robots, which makes it interesting. The other thing that popped up in 1977 was Zambot 3.
Oh, okay.
And do you know what Zambot 3 is famous for?
Oh, isn't that the guy who kills off all his characters?
No, actually, I don't think Zambot 3 was Tomino. Wait, let me check. However, you're really close, in the sense that Zambot 3 was the very first one that actually has like a super downer ending.
Okay.
Oh, yes, yeah, there we go. He directed Yoshiyuki Tomino. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
His name, Kill 'Em All Tomino, originates from this work.
Yeah.
And he decided it was his job to, depict civilian sufferings under invasion of aliens and also do horrible, horrible things. I'm just paraphrasing here. Zambot 3 is the first one where things they kind of, if this was really going on, it would be really horrible. And Zambot 3 decides to actually represent that.
Kind of. The earliest ones did. Mm-hmm. Like again, like Mazinger would have these, it's going to Guy, so
there would be horrible stuff happen. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But you had that split because, again, as the toys became a bigger part of the show, you had things that would move towards more kidified stuff, more cleaned up stuff, more good, wholesome family violence.
Yep.
Because Zambot 3, if I remember correct, I think I've seen a few of them, like a long time ago. It looks like one of those cutesy kiddied up shows. Mm-hmm. And then everybody dies. You're like, wow, didn't see that coming. And that was one of the reasons it was so traumatic.
Yeah, not as traumatic as another one that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but it's, it is the first, well, here, Kill 'Em All Tomino. Yeah. And he has, that's his theme, folks. If you see a show and you can see the director, producer is Yoshiyuki Tomino, you know most of that cast is not going to be there at the end. I mean, he's the original George R. R. Martin. Let's put it that way. It's like, this cast is too big. What can I do to thin it out in the most horrible ways possible?
Yeah, because he has a habit of, who's everybody's favorite character? Okay, you die next.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So, that's definitely true. So Zambot 3 pops up in 1977, same year as Star Wars, and traumatizes Japanese youth. The other thing that's noteworthy for 1977 is Voltes 5, or Voltes V, which, if I remember right, is considered one of the best of the 5-team shows of its era, and I've seen commented, apparently in the Philippines and other parts of Asia, Voltes 5 there was like the most popular thing ever. That apparently was one of the first ones that like exploded like at that time internationally.
Yeah.
A lot of these got to different countries and became super popular in different places. But Voltes 5 was, that was the Philippine show apparently. And even to this day, apparently, like if you go to Philippine, like, anime conventions and stuff, people will be cosplaying as the characters from that show because it etched itself into the Philippine consciousness, I'm told.
Yeah, because I work with a older lady from the Philippines, and she talked about it.
Yep, that's not a surprise there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the other thing too with a lot of the Japanese stuff. It was popular throughout Asia, but also in Europe, and that was one of the reasons why when we were kids, we saw a lot of these shows in French because we had 2 French channels here, and and they were, for the French channel, they were filler because they were already translated because they were so popular in Europe.
Which show was it? One of the giant robot ones, one of the early ones, where like it was on in France at one point, and almost every TV in France was turned to it.
Goldorak, which was UFO Robot Grandizer.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, UFO Robot Grandizer. There we go. So that would have been from 75. Yeah. And now, mind you, the other one was showing a fairly boring documentary, and then we had 2 channels. That kind of spoils the whole thing. But yeah, basically every TV in France was like turned to that show at one point because they really were popular, though. They really were. Like the Europeans got to see a lot of other stuff that we North Americans never got to see. Again, unless you had French TV channels. Mm-hmm. So we Canadians managed to see them, but you Anglais did not. All right, so that's a joke only Canadians will get. All right, so let's see. So going back on so anyway, so 1977 was an important year for giant robot stuff. We had a couple noteworthy shows come out at that point. Not groundbreaking, but again, they were laying the groundwork for what was going to come in 1978. What was going to come in 1978, Don?
Daitarn 3.
Oh, yeah, Daitarn 3. Oh, my God, that show was so awesome. And no, I'm not talking about Daitarn 3.
Okay.
That other show that was by Tomino that I know no one's ever heard of, but we should probably mention it anyway.
Oh, are you talking about God Sigma?
Yes, I am, sir. Yes, let's stop screwing with them, Don.
Okay, now this is important because this is one of those where the change happens. Because I suspect you're talking about Mobile Suit Gundam.
I am indeed. That total huge commercial failure.
Actually, you're almost correct.
I know, I am. Explain.
All right. Mobile Suit Gundam comes out, the very original. This is the first, generally, of what they call the real robot shows.
What defines real robot, Don?
Okay, real robot shows were an attempt to be more realistic with the giant robots. They usually have either more proper scientific accuracy or the idea of the robot is based around one or two concepts. So there'll be like a discovery of something, and that lets us build effective robots.
Also, they're just like tanks. They're just machines.
Yeah, they're mass produced.
Yeah, exactly. Although the heroes unit is usually a high-end special unit of one kind or another, and the original 79 Gundam, of course, is another is a unique unit that's better than most of the other mobile suits around it. But generally speaking, they're about stories about mass-produced robots, and we'll talk about some later where the hero mecha isn't even special. Actually, there's a couple where the hero doesn't even have his own mecha, but we'll get to that. So yeah, the real robot stuff, they're like a fighter plane or a jet or a tank at this point.
Yep, and it's what separates it from that, I guess, superhero technology. That even if the hero's mech is really good, it doesn't exist outside the established technology of the setting.
Yeah, they could build another one.
Yeah, and they often do. Like that's the Gundam unit. I would even argue that once the show gets rocking, the Gundam isn't actually one of the best mechs.
You could actually, that's true, because Amuro is piloting it. Well, we should probably explain Gundam for those who are not familiar with it. Okay, because this is where the formula changes from Guy and his buddies fighting, alien monsters, okay, to something else.
Kind of.
I know, there's okay, anyway. So basically what happens in Gundam is this, okay? In the far future, there are lots of space colonies all around the world because the Earth got overcrowded, so we moved a lot of the people to space, okay? Short version. Eventually, some of these space colonies basically decide that they want to be independent of the Earth. They don't want to be ruled by the Earth anymore. So we've got a rebellion situation. They declare their rebellion by taking one of the space colonies that doesn't want to separate from the Earth and dropping it on the Earth, which, considering that these things are huge, does a whole lot of damage. Yeah. And then they use that as their Pearl Harbor to basically attack the pro-Earth forces and quickly drive them into a corner. Then on a neutral colony, a guy named Amuro Ray, through a series of circumstances, ends up with this prototype mobile suit, because the Zeon, as they're known, the bad guys, are using mobile suits, which are mecha. They're giant robots as their super war machines. They've got legions of them. And so the Federation tries to design a couple mobile suits, and one of them is the Gundam, which our hero ends up with. And then he and two of his friends, because they do still follow that pattern, he's got two buddies who are piloting other mobile suits. There were other prototype mobile suits. One's called the Gun Cannon, and the other is the Gun Tank, if I remember right. And they all end up on a ship called the White Base, which is, again, a prototype space cruiser, which is not very powerful, but is reasonably fast. And they end up being the Earth's last line of defense, basically. Flying around trying to avoid being killed by the Zeon and their forces, and also trying to help the Earth forces whenever they can. And they end up going down to the Earth, and they end up coming back into space, and there's a whole complex set of stuff going on with it. Meanwhile, at the same time, and this is one of the things that makes Gundam distinctive, there's another character named Char Aznable, who is the ace pilot of the Zeon forces. And he is actually the son of someone who was killed by the head of the Zeon. But the Zeons don't realize this, that he's kind of the snake in their midst. And so the other story we're watching him rise up through the ranks and slowly assassinate all the people that messed with his family quietly and secretly in the background. Yeah. And so we've got this juxtaposition of this one character advancing through the Xian ranks and it occasionally coming into conflict with our regular Japanese hero, who's he's the usual hot-headed type. And meanwhile, we're watching the Team Gundam struggle and try to survive against the Xian onslaught and working with what's left of the human forces. So as you can see, it's very much a war story. And a fairly, I can't call it deep, but a fairly complex one.
Yeah, because one of the other things that they added with Gundam that becomes a staple of the real robot shows is the setting is a bigger part of the story because they get into the politics and they get into the lives of the characters more.
Yep.
And that was something... Gundam still has a lot of the super robot trappings.
Yes, it does. It's kind of a hybrid show, halfway in between.
Yeah, because it kind of has that look. Amuro is like the guy who ends up accidentally piloting the Gundam, and his dad was the one who built it. And he thinks his dad is killed in the first thing, and they're not evil aliens, but they're guys that come from space to like attack the Earth. And
the monsters, and the Xian mechs are all monster-like.
They kind of get that way because the Xians there, they have their mass-produced ones.
The Zaks.
They have ones that are, I guess, the ace mech, which is usually a type of Zak, like the Goof. The Goof is...
the Rick Dom, isn't it?
Well, the Rick Dom becomes like the Dickweed mech later on.
I thought they were supposed to be the next evolution up from the Zak.
They were, but they're Dickweeds.
Okay, they are Dickweeds. Okay, sorry.
It starts, if I remember, there's like a team of 3 of these guys with them, and then when you get near the end of the series, there's hundreds of them.
Oh, okay.
But Gundam does have the monster of the week because they have the mobile armor.
Yep, that's true.
That the Zeons start building. Mobile armors are like giant robots.
Yeah, they're not exactly monsters of the week. They only pop up once every dozen episodes, but okay.
Yeah, well, the other thing that happens with those is they don't die at the end of every episode.
Yeah.
A lot of the mobile armors recur.
Right.
There's only a couple. There's only a couple of them in the actual show. And they tend to be a big plot point. Like they keep showing up until
you could almost call them level boss monsters.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah, they're level bosses, basically. I mean, yeah, that's how it works. The other thing that should be noted that Gundam gets into, again, because remember, this is just slightly post-Star Wars. You've got to remember this, is that they were taking a few cues from Star Wars when they did the original Gundam as well. And so you've got giant space cannons. The heroes and main characters are what are called new types, which basically are... They have low-level psychic powers that are supposed to be the next evolution of mankind because we've gone out into space, so our minds are expanding. Here, they're Jedi. Let's be honest. They're Jedi is what they are. Although they don't have TK, if I remember right. No, I don't think any of them do. They just really have precognition, and they can kind of sense each other.
Yeah, it's described as they have like a cosmic awareness.
Yeah. But that awareness means that, among other things, that if they're attacked by normal people, let's say you're a new type and you're being attacked, you kind of know where all the shots are going, so you can just dodge around them fairly easily. Yeah. That's what makes them an absolute terror on the battlefield. And that's why, as Don mentioned, the Gundam is good, but there are suits that are better than that, but because Amuro Ray is perhaps the most or second most advanced new type there, that's why he can just slaughter everything around him, because he knows where all the shots are going, he can just dodge everything.
Yeah, technically he's probably the third.
Oh, that's true. You're right. He'd be the third.
Yeah.
Because Lala would be the first and Char would be the second.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Because that was the other thing that Tomino is known for, just amping up the suffering.
Yep. Yes, he is.
Because he manages in Gundam to outdo the idea of killing everybody, because one of the big love triangles is between Amuro, Char, and Lala. And I'm going to give 40-year-old spoiler alert here.
Go ahead. Yeah.
She gets killed in combat. She's the pilot of one of these mobile armors, the Elmeth. And when she dies, she's in a psychic bond with the other two, so they feel every excruciating moment of her death, which just kind of amps things up so much.
Oh my God, it messes them up so badly. because they're both totally in love with her, because they both had this like deep spiritual super psychic bond with her. And then it's, oh my god, is it messed up. Anyway, but it messes them up. And like Tomino really, now mind you, he does outdo it in Zeta Gundam.
Oh, he does. He outdoes it with each Gundam series after. Like,
yeah, that's true. Oh no,
inside...
Zeta kind of has another level to it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, Zeta. You gotta remember what happens to Camille Vidan in Zeta. I mean, the Camille Vidan is the pilot of the Zeta Gundam in the sequel series that will come in like 1986, I believe. Zeta Gundam. 85, yeah. 85, yeah. Anyway, and we'll talk about that when we do our Real Robot show. Gundam, as Don just said, is the point where suddenly real robots become more popular and more profitable than super robots. Yeah. And so once people see that, then we start to see a true split between real robot shows, which are following the Gundam line, and super robot shows, which of course are still following the Mazinger Z line.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap.
Yes, there is.
Because it's not like a super distinction, because you still find some of the real robot shows will have far out elements to them.
Depending on the series.
Yeah, but they do tend to be the idea that the robot is just mass-produced technology and there's a big political angle to it.
Right. I mean, for example, one crossover one, also coincidentally enough, I believe by Tomino, that comes the following year is Idion.
Yeah.
And Idion is still, I would argue, a super robot show, but it wraps itself very much in the real robot style.
Now, see, I would go the other way.
Really? Okay.
That I would say it's a real robot show that borrows from the super robots.
Hey, you got your chocolate and my peanut butter.
Yeah, Idion's a hard one to explain because it's about a super giant magic robot.
That's one way to describe it, yeah.
But it's very, very grounded. It's very mystical, but it gets into the history and mythology of the setting and the two species being us and the alien Buff clan.
Yep. And everyone wants the Idion.
Kinda. Some of them want to destroy it, because essentially what happens, the Buff clan have these little groups of, like, that'd be kind of the equivalent of, like, North American evangelicals.
Mm-hmm.
That believe in the E-Day. The E-Day is like this universal, like, life force energy.
Mm-hmm.
And a couple of the characters in the Buff clan, like the main one, Kerala, are believers in this. But most of their society thinks, oh, it's just myth, it's tales. And then they find on the one planet, the humans have found this ancient alien civilization with this gigantic, and I mean, the thing is gigantic. And it's the symbol of this religion kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Kerala, the alien that ends up kind of defecting, it's because she thinks this is a key to their religion. And it just gets way out of hand after that. But it tends to be very grounded, because the Idion itself is the universal wonder mech, but it takes a lot of maintenance, and they're constantly trying to figure out really how it works. And it's very nuts and bolts matter of fact, which is why I'd say at its core, I think it's more a real robot show.
But it just has this extra element of super robotness built into it.
Yeah, because even that super robotness, it's not that, it's all based around this idea of this, like, universal life energy. So you've got this weird mystic angle, but that mystic angle is actually, it's grounded in a single ideology. It's not like, I've got my giant robot and it has super photonic power, and then there's a space witch that summons monsters, and this guy's a Nazi ghost and he possesses, like, statues to fight. Like, it's not all over the map. It's got the weird far out elements, but they're very grounded in a small number of concepts that kind of tie together.
Right. Okay.
And at the end of this one, Tomino doesn't just kill all the main characters, he destroys the entire universe.
Just cause. Now, I know you watched the whole series, but Have you actually seen the movie version as well?
Both of them, yeah.
Okay. I heard the movie ending is different than the TV series ending.
Yeah, it's one of those shows, it came out.
You don't have to spoil it for our audience, obviously, but just for general reference.
I'll spoil the hell out of it. Damn you all. It's like 40-year-old show.
Because I know the original series, the original TV series, I heard they ran out of money. So in a classic, that's partly where the Idian ending comes from. It's like, we have no money, what can we do?
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard that it ran out of money and that it ran short, that it kind of, the Sunrise said, nah, just pull the plug. But they were only 3 or 4 episodes away from the ending.
Okay.
So they're basically getaring up for the big fight, and the big fight starts, and then there's like a little thing, and then everybody dies the end. Comes up.
Okay.
That's weird.
Well, that's Tomino. Just cut to the point.
Yeah, because there's 2 movies. One movie is kind of a quickie recap of the show, and the other movie is sort of it's half a kind of a reworking of the end, and then it carries on. That you do get the impression this is the actual ending. That
this was the actual ending.
That
right?
The other one they did just because the plug got pulled for whatever reason.
Right.
And yeah, it ends with the whole universe getting destroyed.
Right.
Because
okay,
what ends up happening, the Idian is kind of it's the focus for if you remember the old Star Trek, they always ran into godlike alien beings in space.
Of course.
The Idian is one of those, that it was this entire civilization that achieved enlightenment and became like a godlike being. Mm-hmm. And the Ide is their will. It's what's left of their consciousness in it. And it's growing throughout the series. There's reasons that I won't get into. And essentially the end of the show is they judge humanity. Mm-hmm. And we're found...
And we fail?
Yeah, and we're found wanting. So they wipe out the universe and decide they're going to try again.
Oh, great. Okay, so the mech is basically just a giant test.
Basically, yeah. Now, there's some catches. It's knowing that it's still worth watching because there's a lot of freaky twists,
and incredibly brutal deaths.
Yeah,
I've seen clip shows of Idian because I haven't watched it myself, but I've seen clip shows of just characters with their heads getting blown off in combat and all sorts of horrible things happening to them.
Not just deaths. There's a lot of Kurala when she the alien that kind of defects. When she first shows up, the humans don't trust her. I can't imagine why. It's not like her species just bombed out their entire city. So they have her in the old hot box kind of thing, locked up on the ship. Right. And everybody hates her and people go out of their way to go yell at her and stuff. And at one point she escapes and keys back up with her people because she's trying to negotiate peace. And the commander ends up stripping her and beating her within an inch of her life in front of all of the troops and that to humiliate. And it's just the whole show is just, and it's also,
wow.
They get into kind of the psychology of the characters. So people are always I guess losing their minds.
Yeah, that's a Tomino series, all right.
And just, you really do kind of feel this deterioration of everybody as the show is going on and the war is dragging out and nobody knows what to do and they're just all giving up.
Yep. Makes sense.
Yeah, and even the ending, I'll spoil it kind of, where you see everybody's spirit traveling off to the afterworld. And they're all kind of meeting up with each other and resolving all the conflicts they had. And the people who are meant to be together are now going to be together for all eternity. And you see them fading. And there's the one sidekick guy's I'm still alone? What the hell is this? And that's the last thing you hear from oh goody, he gets to be alone for all of eternity. That's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah, wow. That sounds like such an upper, Don. And I believe we'll put a link to it. I think the whole series is up on YouTube somewhere.
Yeah, you can track it all down.
Okay, well, we'll have links in the show notes.
Yeah.
So let's continue because we don't want this to drag on too long. But actually, we don't have too much farther to go, really, because with end of the 70s and the coming of Gundam and the super robot stuff still continues to exist, and there are still robot shows to this day. There's only a few more noteworthy ones that we should probably talk about, actually, that I would say are especially noteworthy. Okay, we should mention Go Lion in 81.
Okay.
If for no other reason than Go Lion became the Lion Force Voltron series.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, the series that, like, I don't know about you, but actually, no, probably not for you, but for me, that was my first giant robot series.
Okay.
Like, because it premiered, I actually checked this. It premiered just before Robotech did.
Yeah.
And as an end result, it was the first kind of show of its kind, really, that I saw. I believe we didn't see it until like 83 or so. But Go Lion, Voltron, as we know it, it was to North America, of course, of our generation, what Voltes 5 there was to the Philippines. Like, it was the show that we all watched as kids, and was so popular, they've remade it 3 times. The current version, which airs on Netflix, is still airing right now, is on Netflix. They release new episodes every couple months. I would actually argue is the best version of it ever. Like, I would actually even argue it's better than the original, but that's not necessarily hard. But Voltron, Go Lion Voltron, was probably the... it was a pretty good show. It was definitely a different take on the whole thing, which kind of messes things up a tiny bit.
Right.
Because, of course, they're not on Earth. They're actually on another planet, trying to defend this otherworldly fantasy planet from medieval alien empire instead of defending Earth.
Yeah.
Which is a little odd. But, whatever. Actually, when the creators of Voltron, World Events Productions, or WEP, so they saw this Japanese robot show, okay? And they thought, that looks really cool. Okay, we'll adapt this and we'll turn it into a show for North Americans, okay? And so they told the Japanese, the show that they saw was a show called Future Robot Daltanius, okay? Which is about a robot that, super robot show, fairly standard, Mazinger Z type clone. But the main character has like a lion form, and so he has a big lion on his chest. I think he assembles. No, that's right. He assembles, but anyway, one of the parts is a lion. So he has a lion on his chest. So the story goes that World Events asked Toei, give us the show with the lion. But the thing is, they had 2 shows with the lion. Daltanius, the one I just mentioned, and this other one called Go Lion, which they just produced. And they're like, oh, okay, they must be talking about Go Lion. And so they sent them the tapes for the wrong show.
Yeah.
And they watched it and said, okay, let's just go with this.
Yeah, because it was a better show.
Probably, yeah. And so they thought, okay, this will work. But then they ran into a small problem, which is that they needed a minimum of 65 episodes at that time to do a syndicated strip show. That would be 5 days a week, 13 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, at this point, that's what you had to do, okay, to get a syndication deal. So you'd air on independent TV stations all over the United States and wherever, okay? Problem is that there were only 52 episodes of Go Lion. And so they're like, well, what do we do? And their solution originally was that, okay, well, we'll combine it with another series. In fact, we'll combine it with 2 other series. And so then they grabbed another show called Armored Fleet Dairugger 15, which is what we know as Vehicle Voltron, if you've ever seen it, which is about 15 vehicles that can form into a giant robot together. And which is also set in space. They thought, hey, this kind of works.
Kind of.
And then they even planned to do one more, which was based on a show called Lightspeed Electroid Albagas, which is another, again, Mazinger Z type show.
Yeah.
And they thought, okay, we could work with this too. But Vehicle Voltron didn't prove to be as popular as they thought it was going to be, so they just decided to skip Albagas. So what was known as Gladiator Voltron or Voltron 3 was never actually produced.
Yeah.
But they used the Vehicle Voltron episodes to pad out their numbers so that in the end, I believe with the vehicle team, there were...
It's like 100.
Oh, okay. Oh, no, I just told the story a tiny bit wrong. Okay, so what they did is they said, okay, we need more episodes. So they decided to get the vehicle team one. And then they saw that the Lion Force one was popular, so they actually paid Toei to make more Lion Force ones for them.
Yeah, and then they chopped a few episodes up and kind of...
created some patchwork episodes, too. And so there are 72 Lion Force episodes, and they actually, in the end, aired all 52 Dairugger 15 episodes as well.
Yeah.
Because that was also fairly popular, but not as popular as they hoped, which is why they never did the other one.
Yeah, they did toys for it, though.
Yes, well, I remember seeing Did they do the actual toy, though? Because I remember seeing ads for the toys, but I don't remember actually seeing the toys ever.
I saw the one, because what Albagas is it's basically 3 robots that, we'll say combine, but their torso section with the arms kind of comes off, and then they link together, so it makes one blocky robot with 6 arms instead of like 3 blocky robots with 2 arms each. It would have been about 5-6 inches high when you combined it. I remember seeing those at Toys R Us when I was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so maybe they did actually do that, huh? So Voltron ended up becoming the first for my generation anyway.
It was, and it was part of, if you remember at that time, we had that kind of opened the floodgates. Oh.
Well, correct. For many people, sorry to interrupt. Okay, for many of us, that was the first of the giant robot shows, but not for everyone, because Force 5 had run in 1980 to 81, which was just 2 years earlier, or just a few years earlier anyway. And I forgot to mention that, and so I apologize for that. We've mentioned Force 5, but I never explained what it was. Force 5 was basically this adaptation of just the same as Voltron in a way. They took episodes from a whole bunch of different Japanese series, which were almost all giant robot ones, and they slapped them together and marketed them as this giant robot serial thing, basically.
Yeah, except they didn't combine them in the episodes. Like, there was no crossover. It was kind of in some ways it was kind of the Shogun Warriors of TV, that they just kind of used it as like a blanket for these particular shows, but they didn't try to entwine them together like they did with Voltron.
Right. Also, it should be noted that according to the Force 5 page, it was primarily shown only in New England, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Canada.
Yeah, because Toronto had them.
Yeah, Toronto had it. Yeah, Toronto had it, which I should have been able to see it, but for some reason I apparently missed that. So it wasn't shown everywhere, whereas Voltron came during a syndication boom when it literally was shown everywhere.
Yeah, and again, it was around that time we had a bunch. Like, that was kind of opening the floodgates for the next wave of giant robot shows.
Yep. By the way, just as a general note, Force 5 consisted of 26 episodes each, from Guy King, Dengardace, Starvengers, Grandizer, and Space Cateers.
Yeah, Starvengers is the second Getta Robo.
Is Getta Robo G.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting note, they're 26 episodes each, but the original series were much longer.
Yeah, they're
literally
50.
just picking kind of the plot episodes of each and going, we'll go with that.
No, they're not. They're kind of just, what don't we have to edit copious amounts of violence out of? Yeah, put that one on.
Oh, that explains it. Okay.
Yeah, there were a lot of the stories were kind of a little bit like Space Cateers. I remember being particularly kind of disjumbled.
Right. Well, Space Cateers, interesting note, Space Cateers was actually supposed to be Great Mazinger, but they couldn't get the rights because of what you mentioned earlier. So they slipped it out with Space Cateers. Now, Space Cateers is just Journey to the West. It's the Monkey King set in space.
Yeah.
And so I can see how that could end up being really jumbled and messed up.
Yeah. But there was because remember, this is also the time you had like we did Mighty Orbots here.
Yeah, that would have been 83 or 84.
84, I believe.
And
and then Transformers comes out around this time too.
Yes. Transformers will come in 84.
Yeah.
At least the toys came out in 84 anyway.
Yeah, because what you ended up happening, if you were like a sci-fi like fan, especially the more like crazy stuff, Return of the Jedi came out, Star Wars was kind of dead, and everything science fiction-y, you were starting to see kind of, I guess, the post-apocalypse cyberpunk stuff, and this big influx of Japanese stuff at that time. And yeah, Voltron was kind of the vanguard of like the Japanese robot stuff.
Yep. And again, it had the advantage of this new syndication market, so it ended up being shown everywhere. Everyone jumped on it. The other show I remember from that period that we saw was Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs.
Yeah, it came a little later.
Which was Space Musketeer Bismarck from 84 in Japan.
Yeah.
Again, another super robot show. An interesting one about that, for those who remember Saber Rider, is that again, I was fond of it, was that Saber Rider they were supposed to be this intergalactic peacekeeping team. They were going around to different planets and like fighting, the evil alien outriders in different places, etc. Whereas the original series is completely set on Earth. Actually, Earth and maybe Mars, if I remember right, but mostly Earth. It's just just the Earth is a little bit bombed out from alien attacks,
right? So
that's why it looks a little bit desolate.
Yeah,
but they're actually traveling around on Earth. But they changed it so that they made it look like they were doing the Battle of the Planets routine.
Yeah.
Where they took something that was set on Earth, used a few stock footage shots of them traveling through space, and said, no, they're traveling to other worlds, really.
It's just like Star Wars. Trust us. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of what they did. Not that it was that bad, but whatever. Mm-hmm. And so that was another one that I was fond of that came out during that period. I mean, during the 1980s, various super robot shows would come out. A number of them would. But most of them tended to be, again, there's still variants on Great Mazinger, right? Yeah. I mean, or Mazinger Z, whichever. It's the same thing. And so they're still following that same line. So that's the thing, right? A super robot show is generally about a super robot fighting monsters, and that's kind of what they do. One interesting one that came out in 88, which I've got another personal fondness of, so I'm going to mention, is Gunbuster.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Which came out as a 6-episode OAV series that combined super robots with a show called Aim for the Ace, which was a television manga and anime from the 1960s about girls' tennis. Mm-hmm. And it combined that with giant robots. And if you haven't seen Gunbuster, you really should, because Gunbuster is amazing. The only problem was that it was one of the very first releases in English of actual anime with English subtitles. They were actually marketed as anime. Oh. And they were released by, I think it was Animego.
Yeah.
Was the company. And they released that and Dangayo.
Yeah.
Dangayo and Gunbuster were the first two. And I bought both of them because, that was just the time I was around, 18 or so at that point. And it's like, oh my God, real anime. And from Japan. And because up until then, we'd been forced to watch hacked up dub jobs at that point.
Yeah.
Bad dubs for the most part. With characters that talk like this.
Yeah.
So Gunbuster came out. So it's bizarre the fact that what I was watching was this deconstructionist parody. But it was the very first actual one I'd seen. So to me, it wasn't a deconstructionist parody. I and many other anime fans of that time took it completely seriously. We kind of knew that it was a bit weird, but it was like, they're Japanese. It's okay. And that's also that was also made by Gainax.
Yeah.
Who would later go on to produce a whole bunch of other stuff. Many of them super robot shows, including one that we're going to talk about in a minute called Evangelion. Mm-hmm. And they also produced Gurren Lagann in 2007 was also Gainax as well. And that's another super robot show that everyone went nuts for during its time.
Right.
I'm sorry, guys. I tried Gurren Lagann. I've tried it twice. It just is not my cup of tea. But I do love Gunbuster. And if anyone gets the chance, especially if you actually have seen other stuff before that, don't watch it as your first like I did. Kind of. I mean, I'd seen Voltron and that's why I had some idea. But Gunbuster is amazing and they still are fighting monsters in it. They just happen to be fighting fleets of monsters that are 500,000 monsters at a time. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's Gunbuster is really cool. Really very well animated, lots of fun. And so they would continue with various robot shows. Also during the 1990s, there was a super robot series that you may or may not be familiar with that were called the Brave Hero series. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. They're the Brave series. They started in 1990 with Brave X-Kaiser. And X-Kaiser was, they were space cops, but they're basically space cop robots. Okay, it's still a super robot show, okay? And it was produced with, in license with the toy company Takara. So they're all basically toy commercials.
Yeah.
Okay? And they would do one of these each year for 7 years. So there's actually 8 of them. And they're all super robot shows. They involve a lot of robots usually because, again, more toys, right?
Right.
Toy commercials. They were, there would be X-Kaiser, Fiber, Dagarn, Mike Gine, J. Decker, which became a little bit popular. That J. Decker is interesting because I believe it's the one that set the standard of you have that's almost a hybrid where you have like a couple of kids that are like junior high school or younger kids, and then they team up with robots that are semi-sentient, but sometimes they also pilot as well.
Right.
Or can combine, and then the kids pilot it or something like that. So, and the robots are usually sentient. That's, I believe, J-Decker set that standard. They do a lot of those today, actually. Yeah. Those are still popular today. There's one running on TV right now. I can't remember what its name is, but it's, I can look it up. Anyway, and so they would run, the Brave Hero series would run throughout the 90s and would basically culminate in what's considered to be the best of them, which is Galactica, which you mentioned earlier in 97.
Right. Okay.
Galactica, for anyone who hasn't seen it, and therefore does not have the theme song stuck in their brain for the rest of their lives, and once you hear it, I'll put a link. You'll understand what I mean. The Galactica ones, they basically took everyone who was like a master of the super robot genre that wasn't Go Nagai or Tamano, and basically put them on one series and said, what's the best you can do? And Galactica is literally the best they can do. Mm-hmm. I would argue that Galactica is one of the top 3 super robot series of all time.
Okay.
And that I don't say that lightly. I really do believe that. Have you actually seen Galactica, Don?
Yeah, I saw a few of them back in the day.
Yeah. I was fortunate enough, and again, I'm biased partly because of this, but when I was actually living in Japan, I stumbled across Galactica, and I actually watched them in Japan, in Japanese, back in the day. Mm. I could follow them, and then I went back and watched them with subs later on, and Galactica is amazing. It really is. It combines a whole bunch of different elements, like even going back to Tekkaman. There's bits of Tekkaman in it. There's bits of Mazinger in it. There's bits of Captain Harlock in it. Galactica kind of literally it's a mix mash of I'm not kidding, all the best super robot stuff from like, what at this point, 97, so over 20 years. And they basically combined it all into one glorious series.
Right.
And I as you can tell, I can't emphasize or praise Galactica enough. Galactica is the series that from the 90s, Super Robot series that I go nuts over. There is another show that most other non-Galactica fans, you poor people, do go nuts over, though, that was from the 90s that probably should be mentioned. Actually, I already have mentioned it, of course, which would be...
Lumune and 40 Fire.
Almost. That's not a bad one, actually. That's okay.
Uh-huh.
And that's another Super Robot show. That's following more of the Gatchaman type line, but yeah, which we haven't talked about. But yeah, no, I was of course going to talk about Neon Genesis Evangelion.
Okay, there we go.
Which was how can I put this? Which was Hideki Anno's take on Ideon, which was like his favorite series in the world when he was growing up. And I believe it was The Return of Ultraman, which was his other favorite live-action series. Mm-hmm. And so he combined elements of both of them into Neon Genesis Evangelion. Or Evangelion, however you want to pronounce it. Both work. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's basically was how can I put this? A real robot teched up version of the Super Robot type show. In that sense, very much like... Ideon in a lot of ways. It very much is Ideon, actually. It even kind of looks like it.
Yeah.
Where a kid named Shinji Haramaki is his name? No, Shinji Ikari. Where a kid named Shinji Ikari is
a drone
forced by his... well, that's where it's a bit of a deconstruction.
Uh-huh.
Where, for example, he's the anti-super robot pilot in the sense that he's this neat... And I mean that in the NEET, Hikomori, loner, or whatever type kid who just wants to curl up in a ball and be left alone, whose father keeps forcing him to pilot a giant robot. That's... Well, I won't go into spoiler territory with it. But anyway, Evangelion was a kind of a deconstruction reboot of the whole super robot thing, and was a very good one, in fact. It actually is, for about at least the first 15, 16 episodes, is really, really good. Mm-hmm. And it was so good, it became the new template for super robots, I'd argue, after it.
Yeah, because there's a couple things to consider before we get here, I think.
Oh, okay, sure.
The super robot stuff in the 80s kind of got usurped by the real robot stuff. Because the real robot stuff tended to be more serious. It was... I guess you'd say it was for like an older audience. It wasn't just kids stuff.
Yep.
The Super Robot shows tended to be combiner shows during the 80s.
Influenced by the Transformers, among other things.
Yeah.
And toy sales.
Yeah.
Mostly toy sales.
It was, toy sales. Because if I have 5 robots that combine to make 1 robot, I can now sell 6 robots.
Yep, that's true.
Because the toys were important for the Super Robot. The real robots went by way of model kits.
Mm.
And that was one of the things that Gundam did, where you made the joke about it was a total failure. It almost was. The TV show wasn't real popular.
I know, yeah.
But the model kits sold like crazy.
And so because the model kits sold like crazy, they reissued or re-aired the TV show, and it was a huge hit the second time around.
Yep. And it's important to think the model kits... Gundam also kind of started that idea of doing model kits to go out your show. Because you had them before. You had them in like the Super Robot era, but the model kits were basically a toy that you built.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd have like wind-up motors or stuff. If anybody remembers the Shogun Warriors, there were model kits of them that came out in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And they had these weird big blocky feet.
Mm-hmm.
It was because they were molds of the original Japanese Super Robot shows that was where the batteries would go, because they have motors in them that make the head spin and the arms flail and stuff. Because they were toys. When you get to the real robot stuff, everything goes by way of model kit instead of toy.
Mm-hmm.
Because, again, you get more detail. It goes with the idea of the tech being more solid.
Mm-hmm.
There's overlap. Because when you get Idion begets Macross, and Macross is kind of the template for the real robot stuff.
Yep. And which is not the trail I went down, because again, that's the real robot stuff, and we'll get to that later.
So we're going that way. If you follow through, a lot of the Super Robot stuff gets pretty kiddied up, and again, it's mostly to sell toys.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point you've made, is that, the real robot stuff goes the way of model kits, and the Super Robot stuff basically just becomes toy commercials.
Yeah.
With a few exceptions, Evangelion being one. There are Evangelion toys, but it wasn't really set up that way. Mm-hmm. Whereas Galactica, which I mentioned, and all the other Brave Robot series that came before it, were total toy commercials.
Yeah.
Really good ones in Galactica's case, but they were total toy commercials.
Yeah, because that kind of, again, goes back to Combattler V.
Yeah.
That it started that idea of combining robots that you could make toys of, because the Getta Robo ones would just sort of magically combine. So their forms would shift, which you couldn't do in a toy. You get to Evangelion. Evangelion, I think, is the prototype for almost a third type of robot show.
That's an interesting point. Okay, what kind?
Because Evangelion borrows liberally from the Super Robot thing. Mm-hmm. It's got that monster of the week. It's got the robot is like...
Oh, yeah. It's a Super Robot show, effectively.
It's the unique thing. The hero's like dad is well, he's a dickweed in this one, but he doesn't die. But that's a running theme, too, that everybody's dad...
I'd argue he's more of a dick than a dick, but whatever.
Yeah, sure. 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. Okay, he's a dick, and Shinji's a dickweed. So there we go. Problem solved.
There we go. That totally works. I agree with that, yes. But
they also take the idea of a lot of the weird, wacky, over-the-top stuff. Mm-hmm. They kind of do, the Idion thing. You can really see it if you see Idion. That they're wrapping it around a couple of philosophies. But then they go back the Super Robot route by just blowing things out of proportion. And it gets murky. Like, they kind of keep branching out of their own philosophy and taking it these different weird places that, again, it smacks of like the super robotisms.
Right.
It's not Japanium, it's God's blood that powers. Oh, okay, I don't know where that came from, but sure, we'll go with that. And I think, again, it almost creates, it's kind of the equivalent of real robot psychedelia. And I think that, because again, Evangelion is crazy popular, it gets ripped off way too much. And I think, again, it sort of remixes everything and almost becomes, I don't know what you'd call it, but almost becomes that third type of robot show.
I can see your point, and I think you're onto something, that there is another kind of robot show that kind of emerges after Evangelion, but I don't know quite what to call it.
Yeah.
I know that Evangelion has a huge amount of influence on almost everything that comes after it, as you said, and I think it encouraged a lot of other takes on giant robots. Like, for example, in the 2000s, almost all, I think pretty much all the noteworthy, I should say, 70s giant robot shows got remakes during the 2000s.
Yeah.
Like, almost all of them. I'm not kidding. If you look up the list, Getta Robo, Grandizer, you name it. If you've heard of it, they remade Raideen. Dengardes might have gotten one. Guy King got one.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, they basically just remade everything they could.
Yeah.
And part of that's not having new ideas, and part of that is that Mazinger got remade a couple of times.
It's getting remade again.
Exactly.
There's a new one coming out this year.
Oh yeah, there we go. What's old is new again.
And again and again and again.
And again and again. But they tended to remake them with this eye towards Evangelion.
Yeah.
A lot of them are made with that Evangelion lens where it's kind of the same effect. Oh, here, know what it is? It's kind of like, okay, so DC wanted to make, comic book movies. Okay, I'll use this analogy, okay? Mm-hmm. And so they made some Superman movies, and the first one was okay, and things went fine, whatever. The later one sucked, but whatever. And so they gave up for a bit, and then superhero movies started to make money, and so they're like, okay, let's make a new movie. So they made Batman movies, and the Batman movies made a shit ton of money, okay? So what they decided to do is referring to the Christopher Nolan Batman movies in this case, okay? So what they decided to do is that why don't we continue making DC superhero movies, but we'll all make them as though they were in the same setting as Batman, so they all have that Batman-esque dark tone to them, and they all have this Batman kind of vibe going on, because everyone loved that so much with Batman. So they make one where Superman is now like a hobo for a while, and he's really a dick. And then they make Batman versus Superman, where everyone hates Superman because he's a super dick, and a dark costume and everything. And I can kind of understand why everyone hates him. Then they make Justice League, where he was apparently this beloved figure that was the second Christ of the world, and everyone loved him, even though they didn't. But that's anyway. Spoilers for Justice League. It's like, what the hell? They literally spend the first 10 minutes of the movie trying to explain to you Superman was the most beloved figure ever in mankind's history, after they just finished 2 movies of him being the biggest asshole in the history of mankind and hated by everyone. It's like, really? You really expect us? But anyway, I'm getting off track. But the point is this, okay? Because Batman made a shit ton of money, they basically tried to put everything through the Batman mold that came afterwards, okay? And I would argue that Evangelion caused almost all the robot shows after it to go through the Evangelion mold.
Yeah.
Basically. They used Evangelion flavoring, however you want to put it. So you end up with kind of 3 different kinds of robot shows at this point. You end up with realistic robot shows, which might have their more than one line, but we'll talk about them in another episode. Mm-hmm. We end up with Mazinger Z, traditional giant robot shows, which are basically toy commercials, and they still make them up until this day, and they're that style. And then we end up with this other kind of super robot show that's the original shows, but now done in the flavor of Evangelion. And so they all have these dark elements to it. There's usually some often weird religious or mystical philosophy that goes along with them. They're almost all backed by weird organizations that are somewhat sinister, even though they're the good guy organization. And usually there's some twist ending, or usually turns out the guys they're fighting turn out to be the actual good guys or something like that. They're all trying to basically remake Evangelion using these old robot properties.
Yeah,
and at least that's how I see it anyway. That's what a lot of them feel like.
You're right, and I think one of the things you can do to sort of differentiate the different types of robot show, and it goes with the idea we've mentioned before, how when you write a story, you can focus on plot, character, or setting. In a lot of ways, the old Super Robot shows are plot.
Right.
The hero has a goal. You don't get too much into the hero's personality other than, yeah, he's an angry knob.
Yep.
But the goal is to beat the villain and save the day.
Okay.
When you get to the real robot shows, they tend to be more setting oriented.
Yes.
Because it's that political aspect, and even the robots are part of like an army, and it's that clash of groups of organizations. Even though you see that clash filtered through the characters, they typically represent an ideology from that setting.
Right.
And then the Evangelion mold is a character-based one, because Evangelion, the robots and the plot and the fighting was almost secondary to what a weenie Shinji was.
Yeah, that's true. It was really about Shinji trying to deal with his father issues.
Yeah, and it was very introspective. Now, the sad part was there was nothing there to introspect, but it was that idea of making the personal emo giant robot show. But it's that character aspect. Even
I know, I think you're right. I think you're completely right.
Even to the point that the Evangelion, the weird metaphysics, was personal metaphysics.
Yes, that's true.
That the robot itself, in a very weird, tangible way, represented, how come you went away, mommy? So,
well, the robot, spoiler, has his mother's spirit in it.
Yeah.
It's implied anyway.
Yeah.
His mother's soul is in the damn robot.
And then remember, he's essentially hot for his mom because the one of the other pilots is like a clone.
Yeah, she's a clone of his mother, basically. Yeah. There's Evangelion goes some interesting ways, and of course it also suffers the same fate as, ironically enough, I don't even think they planned that, of course, as Idion, where they basically run out of money at a certain point towards the end. And they're like, what do we do? And it's like, well, Idion did this, and we're copying Idion anyway. Let's just go all the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so they do this bizarre ending, sort of ending, that...
The Evo is inside you all the time.
Yeah, well, anyway. and then, well, no, they do that, and then they do the movie version, which is equally messed up.
Yeah.
If not more so. We didn't need a 5 or 10 minute scene of Shinji masturbating at his girlfriend's bedside. Oh my god. Yeah, I'm not joking, folks. I'm not.
There was a lot in that we didn't really need. But again,
no, we didn't.
Because the movie was the actual ending. The ending of the TV series, at least the original ending of the TV series, was this weird, like cinematic, verite
existential.
Art. Yeah. Like Andy Warhol performance piece thing. And then, the movie is like the actual ending of the series.
I consider Evangelion 18 episodes of a really good super robot series. And after episode 18, you can kind of bail. It's around 18 or so. There's a point where, just stop there. You'll be much happier if you do. Because that's where everything just goes to crap. And up until then, it's actually it's that, downer ending thing. Up until then, it's a really cool take on the whole giant robot thing, and there's a reason I think they're still making movie versions of it right now.
Movie or a series, because there's like a new one coming out where it's one of the other pilots who's like a hot chick this time. So
there's a new series? I know there's a series of movies coming.
Are they?
Or it's
movies?
Been coming out for a while.
Or there's
movies coming out. They're releasing one every 2 or 3 years.
Because they did movies. I thought they did like an add-on or a reboot of it. And then I've seen these ads.
Movies are a reboot.
Okay, and then I've seen these ads for this new thing with this like new pilot that wasn't in any of the original stuff that I saw. But
the movies have a new pilot. There's a new girl with glasses.
Yeah, that's her.
She's from the reboot movies.
Oh, okay. Which is basically, what if Shinji didn't suck?
Well, there's a few weird things about it, actually. One of them is that in the movies, they actually took out a lot of the Christian mysticism and replaced it with Shinto instead.
Okay, that seems...
So they changed a lot.
Yeah, so it's pretty much not the same show at all.
Not the original anymore. At least that's what I've heard. I actually haven't watched it. I've got a couple of them on DVD. I got them a while ago, but I just never gotten around to watching them.
Yeah, because I don't think I'd go 18 episodes. I think for me it was like 13.
That's about right.
And I can tell you the exact part where I'm like, oh no, and it's the one with Ray.
Right.
Who am I? Why is there blood on my hands? Oh my God, no, don't do this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that when you see that episode, just stop, folks.
Well, although I gotta say, it's like my problem with it is it's way too emo.
Yeah.
Like
it's 90s.
I
it's
deal,
very 90s.
Yeah, I deal with unmotivated whiners like during my day. I don't want to spend my spare time with them. But even then, Evangelion's one of them things. It's so weird and so different that it literally is like a car accident. You don't want to watch, but you can't help but watch because I got to see what happens next.
Yeah, but the problem is you don't really see what happens. Well, you do sort of see what happens next.
Yeah, you kind of see because you kind of see the after effects of everything. Like all the horrible stuff that happens, you don't see it happen. You see either people crying about it or like the damage that happened. But you don't actually see, like, that's in some ways that's like the nice thing about Shinji whacking off in the movies. You're not actually watching it; you're just kind of hearing it.
Well, you're getting like expressionistic shots.
Yeah, here's the roof. Here's like the IV thing. Here's the, oh my God, fast forward is the, oh my God, what the fucking fuck. But anyway.
Yeah. By the way, they're called Rebuild of Evangelion, and they've been releasing them since 2009. There's 4 movies that are basically a retelling of the series. It's called Evangelion. They call it 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and then the 4th and I believe final one, because I haven't watched them yet, is due out who knows when. I don't know why they haven't released a new one since 2012, but supposedly there's a new one coming.
Yeah, okay.
With the conclusion of the 4th film, which is sometime. Anyway, yeah, because it's a retelling rather than just the original, footage, rather than the original show or whatever. So Evangelion kind of set its new standard and took things in a different way. Yeah, and things have continued since then. I think things have continued for both the 2 Super Robot lines since then. They've remade a ton of stuff, as we said. One I actually consider of note, there was one called, Goddamn, that came out in 2003. Okay. Goddamn is actually pretty good. If you get the chance to see it, it's actually really nifty. It's a throwback, but it's a really well done throwback to the original, and it's not just Monster of the Week type stuff. So it's actually pretty fun. Huh. Anything else? Oh yeah, Gurren Lagann, which is again another Gainax one, except this is them not doing the Evangelion route, but doing although it is still more character based, but it's the one I mentioned earlier, where it's a post-apocalyptic Earth, and this character finds this drill robot, and it goes from there. Yeah. And it's to super way over the top levels. Gurren Lagann is meant to be again almost a extension parody of the whole super robot genre, and it's okay. Lots of people love it. I know lots of people who do, but it just was never kind of my thing. Let's see. They keep making Mazinger reboots. Because down the list,
like I say, it's Mazinger Infinity, I think, is the new one that's coming out this year.
That sounds about right. I actually don't know. It could be. I wouldn't surprise me. You can take a look.
Yeah, Bandai has a teaser on their model kit website.
Well, there we go. So Mazinger Infinity. There we go. And so why then, now that we've gone through all this, folks, sorry folks if we've been a little long-winded about the whole thing. We're going to bring this puppy onto a close. Let's kill the monster and bring the robot home on this one, Don. So why are giant super robots appealing? What's the appeal to these things?
I think at this point in Japan and even here, because again, when you get to the 90s and we had access to more Japanese stuff, I think part of it is, I don't want to say inertia, but the template is kind of ingrained in a significant portion of like sci-fi fandom's brain. And it's in a way, it's such a simple concept. Giant robot, huge laser, smash things. Right. But there's something kind of universally appealing to that. and something intriguing. And I think especially with the super robot stuff, it kind of represents a sci-fi dream of humanity's childhood, because we know we're not going to go that way.
Right.
Like I say, I think that's why the real robot thing took off in the 80s, because it looks more like where we're headed. But the super robots are like the steampunk of giant robots.
Right.
And
well, okay, yep, go, sorry.
Well, steampunk in that they're the future that didn't happen. But there's still an appeal, there's still a charm. It's ingrained enough that it taps into something that's there in most people.
But it taps in, but then why did North Americans never, I shouldn't say never, why has there been almost no North American super robot shows?
I think because we have superheroes.
Okay.
That fulfills that same need, because, I don't need a big 20-story high robot to smash stuff. I can just be the Hulk or Superman or that. And because we didn't have that grand and glorious technical future at the beginning of our like pre-war modern-ish idea, it didn't dig in like it did in Japan.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, we love them, we appreciate them. There really have only been 3 American attempts to do super robot shows, which we didn't talk about, but we probably should mention. There is, of course, the original one, which is...
I go with Mighty Orbots.
There we go, that's the one. Mighty Orbots, which was an early mid-'80s attempt to do a super robot show, but it was also done in conjunction with the Japanese, so it really is still almost a Japanese series.
Yeah.
There's some American sensibilities and style to it. So yeah, Mighty Orbots, which is a lot of fun, we recommend. There's Megas XLR,
yep,
which was done a number of years later, which is weirdly almost more of a parody. It's almost the anti-Evangelion.
Yeah, that's the best way of putting it.
Where it's like, let's focus on all the silly aspects of giant robot stuff instead of focusing on all the deep, serious aspects. And so Megas XLR did its thing. And so that was somewhat popular. Again, none of these were super popular. And then finally the one which I consider the best and which is my favorite of the lot of them, which is, of course, Symbionic Titan.
Yeah.
Which was done by Genndy Tartakovsky, who... Is it Tartakovsky?
I think it's Tartakovsky. The guy who did... he did, Samurai Jack.
And Powerpuff Girls.
Yeah.
And Dexter's Lab.
Yeah.
And his great tribute to super robots was Symbionic Titan.
Yeah.
Which criminally only got 1 season, but it was a really, really good season. And I consider it one of the best super robot shows of its kind. Although, again, it's oddly enough, it's not really about the robots. It's actually about the characters.
Yeah.
The super robot aspect is almost the secondary thing. It's a super robot show, but it almost follows that Evangelion mold more than it does the Mazinger mold.
Yeah, and to that end, too, even though Megas XLR is definitely a comedy, it focuses more on the characters. And I think, because again, those 2 shows are like early 2000s, like they're very recent. And I think, again, it's that idea because when you got to the 90s, you had the Japanese stuff take off here as Japanese stuff. It wasn't re-edited. It wasn't kind of like we disguise that it's not from around here kind of thing.
Right.
Because that's what happened in the 80s, that everything had to get kind of like Westerned up a little bit.
Yep.
And then because of the 90s, you can kind of get away with that now because those ideas are in people's heads. At least some, because it goes with what we said before. You can always add one weird thing to your story and not lose the audience. That it took those 30-some years before the giant robot thing was ingrained enough in the consciousness of the West that you could produce like your own version of it.
Right, without people reacting to it. And thus we get Pacific Rim.
Ah, okay.
Which is a tribute by Guillermo del Toro, of course, to Mazinger Z and the other, he literally says Mazinger Z, and the other super robot shows he watched in Mexico as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up watching them in Spanish, just like you did. And so as an end result, Pacific Rim, the first one, is his tribute to those giant robot shows.
Right.
And presumably the second one, which is due out in late March. It's probably already come out by the time this episode airs.
Yeah.
So I have no idea if the second one is good or bad when we're discussing this. I'm hoping it's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably be going to see it because I love the first one.
Right.
Because it really was this amazing tribute to giant robots. And I have to say, when I watched Pacific Rim in IMAX, in 3D in the theater, and I saw it twice to show, and I never see anything twice in the theater, folks. I saw Pacific Rim twice in the theater. And I paid for IMAX 3D to watch it twice. It was like I was watching Voltron for the very first time, or whatever. I mean, it was that experience of just absolute pure joy and pure love on the screen. My childhood was brought, and that's what Del Toro was trying to capture, and he really did.
Right.
And so, if you want to see the most pure essence of giant robot story, and you haven't seen it, go watch Pacific Rim. If you can't stand watching old Japanese cartoons, but old Japanese cartoons are kind of awesome.
Of course, the funny thing about Pacific Rim, and I think you might have answered one of the things I've wondered about, like getting through this episode. I've seen a lot of critics that did not like the film, and I can totally see that because it's about robots punching monsters, and that's what it is. They don't screw around. But there's a tendency of critics to refer to it movies being stupid.
Yes,
and I've mentioned this before. It's not, because I just watched it like yesterday.
Oh, good move.
And it's not stupid. Every single thing makes sense. Like all the things that people said, well, that's dumb. Why'd they do that? Well, it's in there. They don't necessarily tell you, but it's there. You don't have to think about it too hard. And I'm wondering if it's again because the giant robot formula here in the West, even though it's kind of taken off, and this goes with why Megas XLR or Symbionic Titan never quite took off, because that template is still, it hasn't spread throughout all of like the North American audience.
Yes, I think you're right. Yeah.
And that's why to a lot of people, because they didn't grow up on like the import stuff in the 80s and the 90s, it's still kind of inscrutable to them just on like a fundamental deep core level.
Yep. But that's why Pacific Rim got a sequel, because it was super popular in Asia and Europe and the rest of the planet, where they grew up watching these giant robot shows even more than we did. And so even the older generation is like, oh yeah, I watched this show as a kid. I watched, Grandizer or whatever, or Goldorak, whatever. And so the end result is that when they saw Pacific Rim, it's like, hey, there's my childhood. But North Americans didn't. Yep.
And not even just in a nostalgic sense. It's that idea that, like we said, there's too many elements that if you're not familiar with a giant robot show, that don't kind of play out. It's like, I always use the example, if you come into Superman cold, how come the greatest reporter at the Daily Planet doesn't recognize Clark Kent without his glasses? Well, because that's a superheroism. You have a secret identity. As long as you pay nominal attention, nobody figures it out.
Yep, but, exactly. You just go with it.
Yeah, because it's so ingrained in Western culture, and we all grew up with that, and so many takes on it. It's a given to us, but the giant robot thing isn't. Yep,
I agree. It's all what you're used to.
Yeah.
I know, I never thought about that, but you're exactly right. I'm going to have to watch Pacific Rim again this week. But I should anyway, with the sequel coming out shortly. Yeah, I think that's it. And I think that that's probably a good place to end on, I think. I mean, I think we've covered super robots pretty well this episode. If someone wants to learn more about super robot shows without actually going and watching all of them, if you want to go on YouTube, there's a dude or dudette, I'm not sure which. There's a dude named Professor Otaku D2, at least that's his YouTube handle on YouTube, who's been doing a visual history of Mecha.
Yeah.
And he's up to, like, at this recording, he's up to 22 episodes. They're only about 6 minutes each. They're fairly short. And they're going through almost year by year what the mecha shows were each year and how they affected the genres and everything, and what, in more detail than we went through. Mm-hmm. And so you can actually see a lot of what we're actually talking about in action. He goes into a lot of other things that we don't, because we just don't have time for it.
Yeah.
And also, we don't have the visuals to actually show you and explain some of what's really going on and the subtle differences as the show evolves. But yes, if you get the chance, A Visual History of Mecha, done by Professor Otaku D2, I recommend. And it, of course, also goes into the real robot stuff, which we'll be covering in a upcoming episode.
Yeah. Yeah, because
on that note,
whole other kettle of worms there.
Exactly. Well, that's why we specifically divided them up and avoided the real robot stuff, because we can talk about that for even longer. Because that's something that you and I were both obsessed with in our day.
Were?
Okay, good point. Have a great fondness for. So we'll discuss that in our time. So thank you everyone for listening, and tune in next time for possibly more about robots. We'll see, and then hopefully after that we should be talking about Super Sentai, because I just can't wait to talk more about Super Sentai and 5 young, good-looking people in spandex fighting with a giant robot, because I think that's awesome. Thanks for listening to the show. If you'd like to hear more or join the conversation, come visit us at obeythedna.com. You can also find us on iTunes or whatever fine podcast site forgot to lock their back door. So until next time, remember that to master the nerdly arts takes time, practice, and enough Coca-Cola to drop a rhino. See ya! Come on over and join the conversation at obeythedna.com, where you will find show notes and more.